call it. Okay. Welcome to the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, June 13th meeting. On the agenda today, we have items of interest from commissioners, followed by the director's report. Then on the consent agenda, we have consideration of the minutes from May 23rd. That will be followed by the Portland Recycles Plan briefing, which will then be followed by the hauler's franchise review. That is a hearing and a recommendation. So if you're here to testify and you have not filled out a form, I suspect you have. But if you haven't, please do so and hand it to Julie. That hearing will then be followed by the regional transit strategy briefing. We have a full day, guys. And then that will be followed by the Transportation System Plan Stage 3 briefing with the goal to adjourn at 3:45. Any items of interest from commissioners? Well, I guess I have one item, and that's to welcome Andres to the commission. We're pretty excited to have you join us and looking forward to your participation in many of these efforts moving forward. So welcome. And for those of you who haven't personally introduced yourself, highly encourage you to do so. Yes, Katie.
Yeah, I'd like to say something.
Okay.
So I just walked in, so I'm breathless. But I just wanted to report in about the Better Housing by Design that I was involved with. They're finished with their sessions, their presentations, and they took, they had quite a few meetings talking about many different aspects of design in mostly focused on East Portland and some of the areas where the lots are really large. And for me, I learned a lot because I hadn't realized how much the bones of our city, what a difference it makes when the bones are laid out a little bit differently. And there aren't as many choices that you can make. And so oftentimes I think we think that it's somebody has deliberately put something ugly up, but I think actually it's more difficult than that. So I got a lot out of it. There was one, they were trying a new way of running the meetings. They didn't have a set stakeholder group, and they decided that they weren't going to go for a stakeholder group that would reach consensus or decide. They basically just took testimony in a way. And I don't know, since I haven't been involved in these things before, I don't know how it stacked up. And I'd be interested in finding out what staff thought about that. I also, they had half of the meetings were in inner Portland and the other half were in East Portland. They were always interesting meetings, and the feedback that we got from people was very appropriate, et cetera. However, I did find that when we were in East Portland, people were talking about their lived experiences rather than theoretical, and it makes quite a bit of difference. So I would encourage that to always be the case, that when you're working in a part of town, to stay in that part of town. So that's my report on that. And then the second thing that I wanted to bring up was that at the last, I think it was the last meeting, Jeff brought up the concept of this body having discussion and input on new studies and new plans that would be initiated by the Planning and Sustainability. And that was met with a positive interest. And I just I want to find out about that. And I think that I am very interested in that. And there's some studies that I think that should be done in East Portland, and I'd like a venue for being able to express that. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Katie, any other items? If not, Susan, I see you're taking notes on Katie's thoughts.
Good. I guess number one would be then a I think we'll have a discussion at officers briefing first on how we want to do that in terms of, in the past, our dance card has been really full. And so there wasn't a lot of room for making new suggestions and recommendations on next steps. And when there was a little bit of room, it was almost always filled immediately by whoever the commissioner or the mayor in charge of the Bureau. I think we have an opportunity to do more than that this time around, and we're in the midst of it right now. So really good timing. We are doing a new strategic plan for the Bureau, and we are just at the beginning stages of that. So I will put it on as an agenda item during this month for officers, and then we can bring it back here and have a discussion about it
Right.
at a meeting when we have a little bit of time.
So thank you, Susan. That's great. And because I think that there's some things that I want to suggest. And that's what I'm on here for.
Great.
That's
And
why I wanted to be on this commission.
And we really appreciate, because I think you have a really good local perspective. And I think the other reason to do this is also just to share with you what's coming up next, because there are a lot of really exciting, I'd say more in the streets at the neighborhood level sort of projects that are being proposed and that are already starting and underway. So we'll be glad to share those and look for other ideas. My second item, or third, two more. One, again, to welcome Andres. I don't know if you want to, or if you have an opportunity to really spend 2 minutes and share a little bit about yourself. I think that would be great. We had a nice sort of welcoming to him at City Council now about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he shared why he wanted to be on the commission and what was important to him. So I think you'll find him to be a great and interesting partner in the work you do here.
Thank you. It's nice to meet all of you. I'm finishing my Master's of Urban Planning program at Portland State. I came to do equity planning and kind of ended up spending a lot of time in housing because that was the pressing conversation in Portland. My background is in policymaking, and I've been interning at the Housing Bureau as part of the policy team. What really interested me in being part of the commission is because the city's been doing a lot of interesting work around equity, and I was interested in being a part of those conversations, more than just learning about them, to actually have an active role in being part of pushing forward those conversations. Personally, I've become really interested in how we think of community outreach. I found it really rewarding when the process turns from simply asking the community what they're interested to, trying to put them in the driver's seat and trying to have them direct the conversation and feel like they have ownership in the process. So I don't know exactly what that's going to look like on the commission. I've been trying to get my feet wet, understand what's coming up, and see what role I fit into best. Thank you.
So new face and an older face, but not that old, is going to be leaving us as someone's joining us. So some of you probably know that Michael Armstrong has worked for the city for 17 years, and we've worked together all that time. First, I think as an intern, he came for like a 2-month stint one summer to run the numbers on the climate stuff, which he didn't understand at all when he walked in the door. And within about 3 days, he seemed to be the expert on it. So I figured this person was someone I should try and keep around. And he stayed all this time, and he will be going on to, I'll let him tell a little bit more when he comes up to talk, but predominantly going on to share his wisdom and things he's learned with other cities all around the world, and being able to help them be just like Portland or even better, particularly around climate issues. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, so thank you very much, Susan. Just very briefly, so I've had such a fantastic experience at BPS over all these years and the Office of Sustainable Development before that, so it's really been an honor and a pleasure, and to work with all of you over the last handful of years as well. I'm very sorry to leave. I'm also very excited to keep doing this work with a new hat. So as Susan suggested, my new adventure, and I still have 2 months here at the city, so you aren't quite done with me yet, but August 15th, I will transition and work for, it's a new initiative called City Scale. And as Susan suggested, the intent really is to work alongside cities and their partners to accelerate climate action, focusing on US cities. There may be some international pieces as well, but the goal is to figure out how we can make things go further, faster, bring together partners, funders, city staff, elected leadership, and see what we can do, because no time to waste. So I'm looking forward to that. I will miss so much of what has made working for the city special, and I will still be in Portland, and I will cheer from the sidelines, and I will not come and testify, at least for a little while. But I will be watching. So thank you all very much. It really has been a tremendous honor to work with you.
Michael, as you were sitting there, and I just got wind of this, and I am still very heartbroken and sad, and told him I was going to try to twist his arm if that was possible. But now that I hear what you're doing, to go take your talents around the world is what the world needs, and so I certainly applaud all that, and I'm thankful that you're doing that, as sad as I am, that we're going to, here in the city of Portland, lose your specific focus, not that you won't continue to focus, I hope, on us.
I will not. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other items on the director's report? You guys all notice I'm getting used to these things called readers, so it's a new transition for me. Next up is the consent agenda. It's consideration of the minutes from May 23rd. Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No opposition. That passes. Now for the briefing on the Portland Recycles Plan. And while they're coming up, just as a reminder, we do have a hearing for the Haulers franchise review. If you are here to testify, please fill out a card and take them up to Julie. Okay, let's go, Bruce.
Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Walker, the Solid Waste and Recycling Program Manager for Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. With me is Ariane Sperry, Program Coordinator, who leads much of our work in planning and development. I want to just add one thing. Michael shared with us another reason departure was that he saw so much progress with the Portland Recycled Plan that it was a good breaking point. I'm making that in jest because I had the same reaction that Kat did. We were all disappointed but excited to see his opportunity. So, in all seriousness now, we're to report back on the Portland Recycles Plan. We emailed it out, and you've just received hard copy to be shared today. We are highlighting the progress made toward the goals identified in the plan and provide a look ahead at the priority projects that we are going to be working on in recycling and, more broadly, sustainable materials management. So I want to give you a little bit of our timeline here. Council unanimously adopted the plan after several years' consideration. We had iterations approved in 2007, which focused on residential, and 2008, which wrapped up the entire plan that included our developments in commercial. The goals were to recycle more, waste less, and manage our discards more sustainably. A big shift, as an example, is that we delivered roll carts, shifted away from our recycling in yellow bins. We delivered those in 2008. And in 2011, we shifted our entire program to include the food. We wanted residents to have the opportunity to divert the methane-generating food that goes to the landfill and instead put it to a beneficial compost use. So those are some of the positive things that were laid out back in 2008. Program actions to achieve these goals, we accomplished most of them. A few we're still working on, and we'll get back and wrap up in the end. Ariane's now going to go through in a little more detail on some of the highlights of the plan.
Thanks, Bruce. So this is just a snapshot of Portland's discards to give you a sense of scale. Portland residents and businesses generate about 1 million tons of garbage, recycling, and composting annually. And as you can see, most of this material is recovered to create new products, compost, or to generate electricity. As Bruce mentioned, the plan set a goal to reduce per capita waste generation below 2005 levels. And this is a really important metric since even the things that we end up recycling take resources to produce. In fact, most of the emissions related to the food and goods that we purchase occur during the manufacturing phase. So by the time we have an item in our hand and we're deciding whether to recycle it or toss it in the garbage, the lion's share of the emissions have already occurred. So that's why the total amount of waste that we generate matters. And also that's why, as we'll mention later, we're starting to look at the full picture of impacts over the entire life cycle of a product and find strategies for encouraging more sustainable production and consumption. But for now, we're happy to report that waste generation is down and we met our goal that we set in the plan. Over the course of the Portland Recycles plan, per capita waste generation dropped 13% below 2005 levels. And as for recovery, Portland residents and businesses are doing an amazing job recycling and composting. We recover materials from our waste stream at twice the national average. And we made some big strides in our recovery rate over the course of the Portland Recycles plan. Ultimately, our 2015 recovery rate was 70%, which fell a little bit short of our fairly bold goal of 75%, but is still one of the highest in the country. So I think we can feel good about that. One of the changes that made a huge difference in our recovery rate was the change in the residential curbside collection program in 2011. Adding weekly food scrap collection and moving to every other week garbage had really big benefits. Curbside garbage dropped by 1/3, and we also saw a huge increase in the amount of yard debris and food scraps that were collected. Another one of the plan goals was to make our collection system more sustainable. We focused on cleaning up the fleet of our garbage and recycling trucks, requiring that haulers use cleaner fuels like biodiesel or natural gas. And they've also upgraded their trucks. So we have newer, cleaner burning trucks providing service in our neighborhoods and business districts. We've also made sustainability a visible part of the Portland landscape by adding recycling containers to the transit mall, banning plastic bags at the retail stores. And we've also made significant improvements in our own city operations, finding ways to reduce waste, recycle and compost more, and make more sustainable purchasing choices. So this is a photo of a waste audit at a fire station where they literally sort through the waste, weigh everything, identify opportunities to reduce waste and recycle and compost more. And this was just a great photo because the fire stations have been doing some good work, and now all the fire stations are composting their food scraps, along with a lot of other city offices as well. So I just wanted to pause here and see if there's any questions about our progress before we move on. Okay.
Before I talk about the climate action plan and what some of our next steps are, I want to be clear that we also have partners that we work with within the region and in the state. It includes, obviously, haulers who provide those collection services to residents in single family and multifamily, as well as the collection from commercial businesses. There's also, we work very closely with Metro. They have solid waste planning authority. They establish goals, and we work throughout this region cooperatively, collaboratively to move programs forward, and I'm going to give some examples a little later on. Secondly, We work with the state Department of Environmental Quality. There was legislation adopted in 2015 that set materials management vision and goals. So there's a coordinated approach in this state that's moving things to more sustainable actions that Ariane was giving some examples, and we'll talk about some of our programs that fit under the broad heading of our climate action plan. This was developed with our Bureau with close work within the community and adopted by City Council. So our goals they're very ambitious. So by 2030, it's not just reduce our per capita waste, but it's cut it by a third. So further steps forward in this area. Reducing food scraps sent to the landfill by 90%. And we'll get to that in a little bit of some of our next steps. Increasing recycling. Let's recover 90% of all those recyclables, of all the waste that's generated, to put it back, recover it, and put it back for industrial use to make new products. Encouraging sustainable production and consumption really relates to making some better choices, setting up programs that allows consumers, businesses to make better choices to reduce the consumption-related greenhouse gas emissions, and encouraging productions of goods and materials that can be done in a different way. So that's something the city's not going to be able to address completely. We realize that. But it will be working with other cities, working with manufacturers, really to make some steps forward in this area. I'm going to highlight some of our upcoming major project initiatives. And just as a reminder, while we focus on that big program change that resulted in so many positive benefits that Ariane referred to in our residential program, residential is only about 20 to 25% of the waste generated. The other 80% is business and multifamily. We call residential single family through fourplex. I should have said that earlier. So 5 plexes and above, all the apartment complexes, that's not a super large slice, but business generated waste. So that's 80%, the multifamily. So when you think about where do we need to shift our emphasis, one of it with a high priority on a climate related recovery basis is let's get the food scraps out of the waste stream. We're starting on the residential side. We've made a lot of progress. We can do more on the business front. There's over 1,000 businesses who are already recovering food scraps at the back of the house as they prep their food, as they scrape the plates after service at restaurants. Many grocers are already on board, but we can do more in this area. We're looking at, we already have a requirement on the books here in Portland that large food generating businesses are required to divert their food scraps, to recover that. We haven't moved it into, if you will, a compliance or pushing out to businesses other than in outreach assistance mode. And we're going to be shifting along with Metro and the rest of the region to begin work to make sure that these businesses are aware that it's time to start diverting those food scraps. We would provide the technical assistance to move this program ahead. Haulers can collect those materials. And over the course of the next several years, by 2019, we are looking, not just in Portland, but throughout the region, to move ahead in this area. Metro's working, as I mentioned, throughout the region. They are also taking a look at implementing a disposal ban no food scraps from commercial businesses to go to the landfills to take place in 2023. So there's some pretty aggressive steps to move forward, but we believe in working with businesses to take the steps to provide the assistance to make this work like it has for the over 1,000 businesses that are already getting that service. Where's another area we need to work on? Multifamily. We can do a better job in terms of recovering materials from multifamily. It's obviously, with the work you've done on comp plan and seeing the information that's in the media about the number of people moving to Portland, the increase in dwelling units being built in the multifamily arena. There's clearly more people living there. We need to work better. It's time for BPS to focus on this growing and diverse set of residents to ensure that their garbage and recycling systems really are, it meets the needs of those residents. We again are working with Metro on this, and there's already a requirement that multifamily complexes have recycling. It's a requirement that haulers offer that service. But we've taken a very intensive look over the past year, and we found that some of those services and that they're just not as, they've not been as comprehensively delivered as we need to see. We found that the service isn't quite as expanded as needed. And we've also seen that there's a higher rate of non-recyclable materials being put in the recycling containers there. So there's confusion, lack of clear communication, signage, and we want to improve that. We want to develop and implement program changes that really meets the residents' need for better access. We want to improve those services, and we want to get more material recycled. We want better services, better recycling, less contamination. All of it will work together. It's going to be a several years journey, if you will, to reach out to the 4,000 plus multifamily complexes in Portland. So these are efforts that are going to take place over the next several years, shifting away from the single family residential to multifamily, commercial. Where's our emphasis? Commercial food scraps. So I wanted to bring those to attention with a little more detail. There are other steps we're taking. We've referred to sustainable production and consumption. This is an area where BPS is working on a strategy to develop a roadmap to shift some of our patterns. It's not a simple answer, but we know, everyone I'm sure can think of things that there can be some improvements made to really reduce some of the efforts or some of the outcomes of our purchasing habits and the way our commerce system works. It's, again, not simple, but those are some of the steps we look to begin developing a strategy on over the course of the next several years. Public place trash can expansion. Well, how big a deal is this? Well, it's delivering services throughout the city of Portland to some underserved neighborhoods. How are we developing this? If you walk out downtown Portland, there's public trash cans available, and there's some in some of the inner business districts right around the city, the belt around the city. But we've not expanded that over the years, and now's the time. So we got city council approval last year to expand the delivery of the public trash can service. We're also exploring some recycling options there as part of a shelf on those cans. We're beginning this program in the Jade District. We've outlined the regional, town, and neighborhood centers that came from the comp plan. So it's something you're familiar with. That was our guiding document. Where should we work with the business districts? We work with our district liaisons to identify those neighborhoods. So it's a step forward in this area that we think is going to provide for better, complete services throughout the business districts of Portland. Finally,
Bruce?
I'd like,
I was just to say, can you kind of maybe summarize the rest of your points, if that's okay? I know we got you started late, but I want to give our fellow commissioners time to
Yes.
ask you a few questions. I don't want the rest of the folks waiting too long.
that is fine.
Cool.
I appreciate that. Because deconstruction is my last point to wrap up here. So I thank you for that.
We're on the same page.
It is, it is on the, it's been adopted by city council. We're working to put those valuable materials to salvage as opposed to mechanical deconstruction. It's part of our green building program. And we thank you.
Jeez,
for-
I was like, should I jump in or not?
It's
Sorry,
always a
sorry
good-
for interrupting you.
No,
Bruce.
no, it's always a good idea. So we appreciate having the opportunity to share this as background for the work we do. We're not as enmeshed as the planning side. So if you were more than happy to answer any questions, this is a lot of information. So we're open for questions if you have
Okay.
any right now.
And just kind of to our fellow commissioners, because we do have people here kind of hoping to testify. I don't want to keep them waiting too long. I do want to take a few questions. If we can maybe keep them brief or kind of put together a list of thoughts we'd like to share and have follow-up on, that'd be great. I think I saw Teresa's hand up, and then it looks like Andre, and then Chris and Eli.
So I think the idea of pushing back to the trash generation in terms of the sustainable consumption and production is really great. That's a good focus. Do you have the staff and skills you need to do that? It's a little different than what we've been doing with picking up trash.
Well, I believe we do. It's a challenging question. We've got a very engaged and knowledgeable staff to be able to address this. It's how does it shake out in terms of some of the priorities? And you're right, it's not as simple, let's put out a contract to collect certain materials. It's a more thoughtful engagement, and it likely will be requiring a much broader audience, if you will, of bringing in some additional expertise to inform this to move forward.
Andre?
Yeah, these are just comments and things maybe you could follow up on. In terms of getting the businesses and the multifamily to move forward, have you thought about certifying businesses that take that food waste and do a good job so that the city would say, you're kind of like an A restaurant or an A business, and doing something like that. In terms of the multifamily, I think we have a hook because many of those multifamily are doing affordable housing in some manner, and to be able to put a linkage, if you had a certification program, they would have to be certified to get the affordable housing credits and all that. And lastly, looking at the business side of the recycling, the opportunity to use some of the PDC innovation kind of theory to create businesses that would take, use plastic, for example. A tremendous amount of plastic is shipped off to, recycled and shipped to China, as you know, to create a business that would actually use that plastic here in Portland. For what, I have no idea. But is there an opportunity to look at those recycled products and use some of, instead of shipping it somewhere, we create a business that creates jobs here, and we, whatever those products are, just some thoughts.
So PDC, or now Prosper Portland, has, as part of their sustainable business focus has some companies like that that they've worked with, and maybe somewhere down in the next few months, we could bring them in to talk a little bit about some of those companies and what products they're making out of recycled materials. That would be interesting.
And may I follow up just on one thing? The BPS Sustainability at Work program has a certification for going through a range of sustainability actions that businesses can take. So I really like the idea of focusing in on the food aspect for certification. So I'll cut it there, but saying we've already got a program, let's grow it a little bit to address these concerns.
Eli?
Couple quick ones. One is on the page 3 of this report, the bottom right table, which is pretty dramatic. Is that just the residential, or is that the overall increase of compost use and decrease of garbage?
Right, so the residential rate back in 2005 was in the low 50s and then has increased to 70%.
Okay, so if you were to average this out across not just residential but everything, it would be less dramatic?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Well, I'm two little questions. One of them is, are school districts, are they fall under governmental or City of Portland, like in terms of the way you think of the programs? Now that I'm a parent with a school where I see a lot of trash generated and they have recycling, but not much gets done, would that fall under?
So they would fall under our commercial system.
Okay.
We would consider them a business even though they're not.
Okay, yeah, okay. And the others, I'm always curious about behavior shift causes, and you guys have become pros in this, I think. And I'm sure that you've obviously done education, trying to make it easier, trying to have price signals and regulation. And I'm just curious, as you go, these are some pretty dramatic shifts that have been achieved in not much time. Do you have any lessons learned or surprises about was the regulation the key thing that really drove it, and other things helped out along the way, or was there or social norming, or do you have any lessons learned, I guess, that might surprise us, or maybe not surprise us, that really caused this dramatic a change?
Do you want to talk about the pilot?
I can do it in a quick second, which is just the every other week garbage. The change was dramatic. It was within a couple months because people had, if you only got your garbage picked up every other week, you had to look at what you were doing. You couldn't just keep throwing it in the trash can. And people made a change, and they made a behavior change fast. And we had, we had a call center with 4 people manned, personing for around the clock almost, and it was out of control for about 3 weeks. And then everybody got used to it, and then it was fine.
And I would just add that I field a lot of inquiries from other jurisdictions that are trying to do this, or they have already implemented food scrap collection. I just talked to a woman from Australia this week who's here trying to figure out, how are you guys doing this? Because they have food scrap collection, but their recovery rate is 10% compared to us, where we're collecting a much higher amount of the food. We have really high participation. Over 75% of Portlanders are participating in the food scrap collection program. And so I think what you were saying, making that change, that structural change to every other week garbage, is something that's unique about our program and really has driven participation.
So on page 3, you have kind of the progression of the curbside service bins. And I was wondering if where we're at now, which I think is 2011 bins, is the final stage, or if we're seeing something past the system we have now.
Go for it.
So the short answer is that is our configuration moving forward. Though where we want to put more emphasis, as I was referring to, is really trying to figure out the best way to approach multifamily complexes and not focus as much on the single-family residential.
Thank you. And then 2 things for follow-up. One of them on the multifamily, I noticed you mentioned there was specific outreach to apartment communities with higher percentages of people of color, limited English proficiency, and lower incomes. And I was just wondering if there are any specific takeaways that came from that part of the outreach that was different. And then I was wondering just general how efficient the recycling has been, because people talk about putting the wrong thing in recycle bins all the time. And the same question with the downtown recycling containers, how effective that's been at keeping recycling out of the main trash cans.
The first was multifamily. Do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a complete report from Metro that's just been released on the multifamily, so we can get that information to you. And on public trash cans, we will share that information as well.
So any other questions? I'm not seeing anything. And we can certainly do this as a follow-up, but was curious about, are there state regulations that hamper some of our abilities to codify different measures we may be interested in doing? And I guess where I'm going with this is, for example, other jurisdictions may have, like, you have to have a certain amount of recycled content, period, and X amount of product to put it in your building. And I'm again thinking building codes, obviously, with my architect hat on. So, are there things or creative ways that we could do to kind of look at reducing the longer stream of waste production, right? By just saying Portland's going to be a little tougher on this, that, or the other. I don't know, recycled content and carpet. Take it that way or something like that.
I mean, plastic bags was a good example. So there are a lot of things we can do, and there's a lot that we can't in terms of looking at how we source materials. And a first step has always been to look at how to source for government purchasing. So lead by example, and then before we head towards any regulatory thing. But I'm happy to share with you some of the ideas that we have.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much for taking the time, Ariane and Bruce, to report on that. Exciting work. Good work. And next item on the agenda is a hearing and a recommendation on the Haulers franchise review. If you are here to testify, please fill out a card in the back of the room and bring it up to Julie. We are going to limit testimony to 2 minutes per person, so keep that in mind. I will be gently trying to cut you off if you go too much longer than that. And I think with that, we'll move into the next item.
Thank you very much. We are going to be.
It's like a whole new personality up there.
That's right. It's time for our discussion of our residential franchise renewal and review process. This is a hearing. We are seeking a letter of support to move forward with this process as we begin our work on our residential franchise agreement. So the residential franchise system, this is not a municipal service that's provided by, like it is in many East Coast cities. It's provided by private hauling companies. We have a franchise agreement. The city council approves that agreement. It's essentially a contract with 14 companies that provide service to the 160,000 single-family through fourplex households in Portland. Think of the franchise agreement as a framework. It outlines the operations it outlines the requirements which haulers must operate. I've got 60-plus pages of administrative rules that the haulers don't want me to remind them of, but it's everything from they can't be at your house before 6 a.m. to how to address a missed collection to the billing cycle, all those details. The franchise agreement is only about a third of those pages, but it's a legal framework that sets forth, must follow administrative rules. It establishes the territories which haulers operate in, the annual rate review methodology, which we were here last month, is laid out in the franchise agreement. It includes the 5% franchise fee that comes to our bureau to fund our program efforts, the outreach materials that we distribute. It also includes a 9.5 target, not guaranteed, operating margin for the haulers in the system. And it also includes a process for forfeiture and renewal. So that's the agreement that we are looking to get your feedback on, and how we are going to do it is going to be, or the time frame for how we're doing it. I want to give just a little background on. It's a 10-year agreement, so it went into effect in 2013. So it expires in 2023. This is the midterm review. We've done this since 1992, and we have a concise period. Once council launches this, we will come back to council. We must come back within 6 months. And the question is, what changes or what system should be put in place as part of this franchise agreement? The PSC and council could go, we don't want this system, have the current franchise end in 2023 and come up with some other system, make modifications to a franchise, and if there were modifications, a potential new agreement that took into consideration a number of things we're going to talk about here shortly, is that new agreement would be potentially 10 years going forward from 2018, and it would supersede the last 5 years of the existing franchise agreement. So it's not adding 10 years at 2023. It's coming up with a new document that can incorporate a number of different items. So there's different approaches to take, and Ariane's going to cover some of the items to discuss.
So Bruce, you clarified in the officer's briefing that I thought was really important to understand, and maybe you'll get to this, but to that point, if this went into effect, if it is to happen, goes into effect in 2018, if there's an existing hauler who has an agreement till, what was the other date, 2023, they have the option to just stick with their existing agreement or move to the new agreement. Is that correct?
Well,
Or are you not sure?
Well, if they chose not to sign a new agreement, they'd be done in 2023, right?
Correct. But they
So
at least have that option to say, I don't want the new agreement, I don't like it, I'll be out in 2023.
that could be a choice, but it would be a very limiting choice. So, but yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So people understand, I think, in case you're confused at all, the reason that was established that way in the beginning is to be able to make sure that people could recover their costs and have a 5-year exit plan if, for some reason, they wanted to get out of the business completely.
So the franchise agreement,
So when do they bid it out for the new 2023? Is there a whole new? Oh, so just, I guess I'm unclear how, if somebody wanted to get new into the biz, what's their window to get in?
That is what we are laying out in the guiding principles of how to frame a new agreement, and we will take into consideration factors. There's not an open window for bids. It's not, the city of Seattle bids out their residential collection. They have 2 contractors. It's a 10-year period. You come in with new trucks, at the end of the period, you're done. So we have renewed the franchise agreement with modifications, both minor and more substantial over time. And that's how we're looking at it right now. And we'll take into consideration comments you have about our guiding principles.
So if I could clarify, if I am not one of those 14 franchise holders, and those 14 franchise holders continue agreeing to go forward, then I am SOL about ever having a franchise contract in the city of Portland?
Well,
Try and buy from one of them?
Yes,
Is that the
you
only
can-
way in?
that is the current way in, or there could be, we could incorporate consideration of how to involve others in that service provision.
So as part of the renewal process for the franchise agreement, the agreement says the city needs to review the franchise, ensure it's in the public interest, is still helping the city meet its goals. The review factors that are outlined in the agreement are quite broad, give staff a lot of latitude in terms of what to focus on in the review. And so we've developed a set of guiding principles to provide focus for this review. And this is Exhibit A in for the City Council resolution that you were provided. So that's what I'm going to walk through, and not a lot of it is up here on the screen, but just so you know you have that. So, of course, we need to make sure that we are continuing to advance our climate action plan goals related to waste, and we went over those in the last presentation, but they're reduce food scraps sent to landfill by 90%, reduce per capita solid waste by 33%, and recover 90% of the waste that's generated. We also want to ensure cost-effective, safe, and environmentally sound operations, which includes establishing rates through a process that promotes operational efficiencies while meeting policy goals, including equity. Employing a rate-setting methodology that provides franchisees the opportunity to earn a reasonable operating margin without guaranteeing a specific return to any particular franchisee. Developing programs and conducting operations to ensure public and worker safety. Reducing air emissions from collection vehicles. Improving the safety of collection vehicles for hauler employees and for other road users. We want to ensure exemplary customer service, which means responding promptly to and communicating appropriately with customers, using technologies to provide more responsive, reliable, and convenient customer service, keeping and maintaining accurate and accessible customer and operational records. And finally, we need the ability to develop a resilient and equitable system. So we want to increase participation of women and minority workers. We want to reduce barriers to economic opportunity for minority-owned and women-owned companies. We want to collect clean and marketable recyclable and compostable material streams. And we want to maintain the ability to adapt to emerging policy goals. Are there any questions on the guiding principles?
Chris?
This is a little bit of a follow-up to Eli's question. So there are 14 individual franchises. Are they held by 14 individual companies, or are there franchise holders who, through subsidiaries or direct acquisition, hold more than one franchise?
There are 14 franchises. They are maybe located in different areas around the city from historical, as you say, consolidation, but they're considered to be 14 franchisees.
Franchisees or franchises?
They're the same.
Yeah.
And so for history, there were as many
There were
as
70.
70 originally. And they have purchased each other. And then there's a limitation that no one hauler can have more than 40%, so that nobody takes over the entire system.
So concentration is occurring. We have statutory limits on that, but once two franchises merge, we treat them as one franchise in the
Yes.
future.
Yes, even though their area may not be contiguous, they may be different parts of the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Nothing else?
Just next steps in terms of timeline. We're planning to formally launch the franchise renewal review at City Council in August, and we would appreciate a letter of support from you guys if you guys think that's a good idea. Because of the unique nature of this project, how we have a fixed 6-month period once we launch the review to report back to City Council, we'd like to schedule an update with you in October, just to make sure we're all on the same page, when we come to you in November with a draft report. And then our goal is to present a final report to City Council in January. And that's all.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll now take public testimony. If you are here to testify, please fill out a form in the back of the room and bring it up to Julie. We are going to limit testimony to 2 minutes. I'll read off a couple names at a time here. Nate McCoy, Alonzo Simpson, and Harley Bird. Actually, it looks like Harley and Eric may be here together. If that's the case, you can wait and I'll call you up together next. So just Nate McCoy and Alonzo Simpson.
I guess I'll start out. Appreciate the time today, Chair, Commission, Director. My name is Nate McCoy. I run an organization called the National Association of Minority Contractors. We're the Oregon chapter. I'm the Executive Director and Spokesman. And I'm here, quite frankly, today because we've been tracking a lot of the hauler review and franchise conversations. We represent 42 minority, women, and disadvantaged firms that reside pretty much in Portland and Salem proper. And I'm really here because this is a new body for me, because I'm usually in front of City Council and other government agencies, pretty much professing our advocacy around real inclusion and real equity. And I'm encouraged by the conversation today about guiding principles that I wasn't aware of before today. And really wanted to just kind of forge a relationship and opportunity to be inclusive around what now is framing the discussion around potentially reviewing new franchisees, I guess, as opportunities for haulers. We currently have 3 haulers within our organization that are primed for growth, that are really encouraging a diverse workforce. And it would, in my mind, it's a no-brainer to have, given the guiding principles that you guys have laid out, as an opportunity to be more inclusive of some of these minority organizations. In another world, I used to be a city manager for the city of Portland in the Housing Bureau, certainly currently a commissioner at the Housing Bureau. So if you don't know me, you'll probably get familiar that typically I'm the voice of minority contractors and just inclusion generally throughout all of our government agencies. So really what I'm here today is to really provide an opportunity to discuss what you guys are seeing as potential opportunities. We hear a lot about barriers, but I hear very few conversations about how to break down those barriers and what it really takes to really get people motivated, interested, and really on the right track to growing. If we don't get these opportunities, and this is a discussion I talk about all the time, how do you build a resume to respond to working on the next scale of projects? You know, every RFP is always about show us the experience that you've done prior to looking at this RFP. And if you've never had the opportunity, how are you ever going to be primed for that development? So I'm hoping and encouraging that that you guys take a real onus and leadership approach. And I know a couple faces around the table that I'm pretty sure are already probably being vocal. But from any advocacy, given that NAMAC really has sorry. Not as,
Let's go ahead and get the next testifier, and then you can ask questions if that's okay.
Great.
Alonzo?
We're hot, okay. Good afternoon, Chair Schultz, Director Anderson, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Alonzo Simpson, and I'm representing City of Roses Disposal and Recycling, a commercial waste hauler here in the city of Portland. And I was actually at this table almost roughly a year ago for a rate review hearing, and I was addressing my concerns about the residential franchise system then. And I actually just am here today to discuss a little bit more about those barriers that still persist in that system, and how we are at this point where we could look at a review in a way that is a little bit more equitable and a little bit more forward thinking of how we can really encompass a system that's truly sustainable. My goal is really to assist you guys in figuring out a way to really break down those barriers so we can truly create a sustainable ecosystem that benefits all haulers that are interested in participating in this system. The residential franchise system is a definite segue to success for people in this industry. As commercial haulers, it's very difficult competing with multinational corporations, and by having assured volumes or assured revenues, it's one way to actually kind of create more of a level playing field. As a third-generation Portlander and second-generation business owner, for me, it's at the forefront of my aspirations and goals to find ways to be innovators and forward-thinking about changing the paradigm that existed for my father when he first started the company in '96. Furthermore, building on the opportunities that his father, my grandfather, in terms of laying the groundwork for future generations to assure that we have equitable and economic opportunities for the future. To just give you a little background, City of Roses is definitely encompassed a sustainable, motivating factor in terms of being a leader in that regard. We are big supporters of the Climate Action Plan in terms of finding ways to minimize greenhouse gas emissions. We are also a certified benefit corporation, in fact, the only one in the state in this industry. And most importantly, we have a very strong commitment to diverse hiring practices. I just wanted to be here today to let you guys know that City of Roses is here to partner, to work with industry, with the City of Portland, to figure out how do we break down these barriers and create a more equitable industry in order to make it a
Alonda,
truly
could
more
you wrap it up?
sustainable ecosystem here in the City of Portland.
Thank you, Alonda. Questions? Go ahead. Jeff?
Thank you, Chair. Nate, my quick question, you mentioned 3 haulers or members of your association. Do some or all of those own residential franchises?
No, currently none of them, I think, yeah. Currently, none of them do, which is why this is a great discussion today, because I know about the 14, I've heard of them. Some of them pick up at my house, which is great, but I also noticed that some of the workforce that picks up at my house aren't people of color, and I live in a neighborhood that there is a lot of people of color. So just seems like one of those opportunities, given that we're in the city of Portland and people are taxpayers, that we should have opportunities for more inclusion.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Are there specific things in the review process you think would be helpful to try to make the franchise system more equitable?
That for me? Absolutely. I guess I don't know all the layers and all the administrative rules, but what I do know is that some of the goals kind of are what I feel the guiding principles are leading towards, is at least having a discussion at a level to see where capacity is at for smaller contractors and smaller haulers, I should say, to see where they fit into the system. You know, maybe there's a right size to incorporate, just like in the construction world. Sometimes debundling packages of big scopes of work are beneficial to a smaller company so that they can kind of get their feet wet, if you will, and really grow and scale to be that big 14, you know, of the national haulers that are in this state. I think that's where we're at, is trying to figure out where the barriers exist. And I wish I could tell you and point to a couple of them, but I will be watching and tracking closely with you guys to really provide that advocacy to make sure that we don't have unintentional barriers that we're setting in place. So I will certainly chime in when, you know, you guys start to review that and start thinking about if we're opening the door for others.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Next is Harley Bird and Eric Bird.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Schultz and the rest of the commissioners. I started my business, I had the opportunity to start my business, Sphere Solid Waste in Seattle, Washington, in 1982. The city of Seattle at that time decided that they were going to include women and minority businesses, you know, in the collections systems for both garbage and recycling. I was able to sustain my business and stay in business for 25 years. Provided a lot of jobs. We were like people in our community looked up to us. We provided a lot of training, A lot of drivers that worked for us went on to drive for Metro and other jobs. So it was upper mobility. So I'm here to encourage you, to do what you can. The garbage industry is very difficult to get into, and I would not have had any opportunity whatsoever had not the city took a firm stand and required contractors, to subcontract or let 15 to 20% go. And in a franchise scenario as you have here, there's virtually no opportunity unless you win the lottery and purchase a franchise. Other than that, you have no opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm here to kind of piggyback onto what my father said. Growing up, I basically grew up in the business that he was just discussing and I'm referring to. And I worked every job in that business, from cleaning toilets to hanging on the back of a garbage truck to office manager onto operations manager in about a 10, 12-year period there. And like you said, it provided a great sense of pride for the community. It provided a lot of people a lot of opportunity for upward mobility, including, myself, obviously. After, as working for this, for Sphere Solid Waste through college, I was able to, after we sold our business, I was able to move into working for the city of Seattle as solid waste inspections and code compliance manager, where I was responsible for ensuring that contractual obligations were held with contractors, and as well as municipal rules and regulations were followed by customers or citizens. And I guess what I'm here to just say is that without the opportunity that we had back then, I would have never been able to achieve what I've been able to achieve. And I think that's something to really think about and to really consider when you think about how to set aside some work for minority businesses that would otherwise not have a chance to even play in this game. And so I think basically that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to encourage us all to really think about just a pure set aside for minority and women-owned businesses. I think that while the intent of setting aside work and just striving towards goals in that regard and keeping that in our minds is great, I think without the hard numbers that you want to try to work for with a solid set aside portion, I think municipalities tend to fall short. There's always ways to say, well, we couldn't find enough minority businesses to participate, or they didn't meet this criteria or that criteria. And I think that we just have to go a step further to ensure that those opportunities are available moving forward.
Thank you very much. I think either that or I might have neglected asking you to state your names for the record. If you wouldn't mind, would you both?
My name is Harley Bird.
Thank you, Harley.
And Eric Bird.
Thank you very much. I know it's a formality, but I appreciate you bearing with me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is there any questions?
There's one other thing I wanted to say. I also was born in Portland, Oregon.
Fabulous.
Okay.
Michelle looks like has a question.
So assuming you did win the lottery, I'm just curious, how does anybody know a franchise is available for sale?
You wouldn't know. I mean, because it's a very close-knit community, and usually a smaller franchise will contact, Waste Management or Portland Disposal or Waste Connections or whomever, or they will contact them. And matter of fact, they do contact them on a regular basis to check in to see if they're, ready to sell or interested in selling. And they'll keep doing that year after year after year after year. And sooner or later, something happens or whatever, and they cash out.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next is Tony Jones and Beth Vargas Duncan. Just as a reminder, if we could try to keep it to 2 minutes, and please don't forget to read your name for the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Tony Jones. I'm the Executive Director of Metropolitan Contractor Improvement Partnership. We are a nonprofit business center for minority disadvantaged contractors founded by National Association of Minority Contractors of Oregon. I'm here to encourage the Planning Sustainability Commission to review the franchise system and invest to ensure economic opportunity for minority women-owned businesses and workers as outlined in the draft resolution. We, like NAMAC Oregon, work with 40 contractors a year, and we just want to encourage you that when you set goals and you implement best practices and action plans, you can successfully increase economic equity for minorities and women, businesses and workers in the franchise system. We have seen this success happen in different agencies when they do set these goals and best practices and standards to include minorities and women. We believe that you need to conduct an analysis to set these goals to see who's out there, what are the opportunities, what are the barriers, and use that analysis to determine your action plan. So you have to invest, you got to spend some money. Then also believe you need to invest in your action plan to have those minority women-owned businesses and workers participate. That includes, some services that the businesses may need for support to better understand the processes and systems to make sure that the service delivery is there. They do want to deliver with quality their work. They have the ability to deliver quality to work, but they do need support to make that happen. And there also needs to be monitoring and evaluation of your action plan to make sure that it's effective and that it's adjusted as necessary to be effective. We have had the opportunity to work in partnership with Multnomah County, City of Portland, Department of Environmental Quality, and the EPA on assisting businesses to upgrade their fleets and vehicles to clean diesel technology. And so it's an example of a proactive way to help businesses continue to meet the sustainability and changing requirements to have sustainable practices in their businesses and to help reduce barriers by collaborating with agencies and small business. So we want to encourage those type of sort of forward-thinking, proactive strategies to have minorities and women, businesses, and workers participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Good afternoon, Chair Schultz, members of the commission. I'm Beth Vargas Duncan. I'm the new regional director with Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association. And as in that role, I also staff the Portland Haulers Association. The Portland Haulers are members. We have nearly all the haulers in the Portland area that have a residential franchise as members of the Portland Haulers Association. We work cooperatively with the Portland staff, and as you could tell from the past two previous presentations, that we provide garbage and recycling and many other services, curbside, to residents in Portland. And we look forward to being able to do this for many more decades to come. We've obviously done this for several decades, as been mentioned. We provide excellent service, we believe, and we're committed to continuing to provide modern, efficient, and sustainable services. If I may also add, being that we just heard a lot of information about diversity, there are 14 franchised haulers. We represent all but a couple of those. And we do have 3 franchisee holders that are women as owners. So I just wanted to mention that and add that. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Beth.
Actually,
And, go ahead, Jeff.
Question or two, if you don't mind, Beth. So I was a little confused about some answers earlier. I was going to go back to staff, but I'll start with you since you're here and you represent
Sure.
most of the halls. So are there 14 separate businesses that own the 14 franchisees? franchise is? Or there's.
I'm new. To my
Okay.
understanding, I don't know about legal separation of each of those, but to my understanding, they are separate franchisee holder, separate legal entities. But, okay.
And you mentioned 3 are women-owned. How long have they had a franchise?
The three
3 that
women,
are women-owned.
I do not know. And, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That's fine. I'll follow up with staff on a few more.
Thank you very much, Beth. Oh, sorry.
When we say separate legal entities, do we think they have common key figures? No, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is that a yes, not, or no?
I think it
I
was,
believe it was, no, it's not. I call it Company A and I call it Company B, but it's the same guy. My interpretation of the head shake was,
okay, if we could call Bruce and Ariane back up for questions. With that, I probably should say one last time, if there's anybody else who wants to testify, please fill out a card and come right up. Doesn't look like it, so I will close the public record. And now, if you have questions for staff, Jeff?
Sure, I'll follow up. So I apologize for belaboring a point that I'm still fuzzy on. We have 14, since 1992, there have been 14 franchises. No. Okay. How long have we had 14?
About 2 years. It's several, we started with 69 franchisees.
Right.
In 1992, and there have been sales consolidation as it's occurred over time. And the last sale was approved by council a couple years ago.
So these are these geographic franchises?
Yes.
So we allowed the private haulers to consolidate geographically as well as ownership-wise. And if there were 69 geographic franchises and now there's 14, did they result from consolidation of ownership? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. There's 69 franchisees.
Use the microphone, Ariane.
Okay.
Thank you.
There were 69 franchisees originally. They each had their own territory. Those 69 territories still remain.
I
But,
see.
for example, one company may own several of those original
Okay.
now.
Got it.
Now we've had a lot of sales. Yeah.
And are all 14 current owners date back to 92? Or have
No.
there been new entries?
There have been new entries over the course,
Okay.
Throughout the system.
One last question. You guys, you can have the mic in a second. So you're proposing as one of your guiding principles, there's an equity principle. And obviously, we heard a lot of testimony today. Someone even said, how about a minority set aside? So are we being asked to do anything today besides say, yes, equity consideration should be part of this review? Or are we being asked to consider any specifics on how that would be implemented?
Today, this is simply a recommendation, and obviously any comment is helpful, but to initiate the franchise review with how to advance equity as one of the considerations. So no policy specifics are on the table now. It's more, you would be recommending to council that they direct us to see if you can come up with some options for addressing that before this comes back, first for discussion here and then eventually to city council.
And Michael, could I add to that, I guess, a review of the guiding principles that you're suggesting, and there are other guiding principles we'd recommend you add?
That would be welcome as well.
Okay. So Eli, I know you're lined up, but I think I saw Chris and then Eli, and then it looks like Andre.
So the other principle that I find interesting here is the fixed rate of return. And I'm thinking about that in combination with the equity goal that we're talking about. So we could ask people to bid for these on the basis of a rate of return, right? That would be one way to do it. I'm sure there are many ways we could conjure up a bidding system, but we could let people compete on the basis of the rate of return they're willing to accept. I wonder if that would improve the inclusiveness or hurt it. I honestly don't know the answer to that. but it would certainly benefit the taxpayers, or the ratepayers, sorry, of the city of Portland in this case. So do we have a policy rationale for keeping a fixed rate of return beyond, having a well-operating system?
We intend to explore the operating margin.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the considerations we have to take forward. We don't have a position right now that gives the variables that you've just announced, but we intend to review that.
And the principle is to allow an operating return, but doesn't specify a fixed one.
Right, but it assumes that the system will set one as opposed to let people bid for it, right?
Does it assume that, or does it just say you're going to study how the return? Maybe perhaps a way to say it is we would recommend, or there's a recommendation that we consider whether it should be a fixed rate of return or another option that we should study.
I guess I'd say that a little more broadly and say, you should study whether a competitive bidding system of some form would improve the inclusiveness of the system. Put it that way. It's the intersection between those two issues. And then I do want to acknowledge bullet number 5 under item 2, improve the safety of collection vehicles for hauler employees and other road users. Those of you who've been following my rants during the annual rate setting process will know that I've been arguing for mirrors and side guards as a way to help implement our Vision Zero goals. So I'm very happy to see that bullet in there. Thank you.
Eli?
I think I need to understand a little bit better how a franchise works. If someone signs a franchise agreement, how long does that last?
10 years.
Okay. I guess my thoughts are, but you can automatically, is it an automatic renew option or no? Okay, so it's up to the city. So the fact that we've not set up a system where there is a periodic rebid that's elective on the city's perspective. It's not baked into the franchise agreement system. Okay. So, because it feels, and there may be, I'm sure there's another side to the story, but it feels kind of like a time in our history when you had to be white to own a house. You could sell it to anybody you wanted to, which might be someone of similar looks to you. And then without government intervention, it can persist like that for decades later. And that we may have a system. Now, I do not know the demographics of the haulers, but let's say they're all owned by corporations or white people, then, and that was the case 25 years ago. And if it's still the case today, if there's never an opportunity to have it be competitively bid, that could persist for another 50 years. So that's troubling to me from an equity perspective. And so I think it's great that we have an equity goal in terms of the workforce hiring stuff, but that does nothing about the 9% or whatever the number ends up being, which would always go to the owner of the company, not unless there's some requirement for shared ownership to the workforce itself. So I would guess I would highlight that as a serious concern with the current model and are calling to do some sort of a reset where there can be some competitive bidding. And I'm not sure, as Chris alluded to, what the best place to have people sharpen their pencils. Maybe it's on price, maybe there's other factors or a combination of factors. But I would be encouraged by a system that called for some sharpening pencils and also opening up the playing field to those who maybe are in the field now who weren't doing it 25 years ago.
Andreas, and then Michelle.
Yeah, first, I'm just going to go down the goals and just add some things. Susan had talked about having people come in and talk about, how we get industries to reuse our recycling. I would like to see that more emphasized, maybe as a goal of how we can, I guess, ramp that up, make it more of a robust policy over time versus just, it sounds like they're small industries, so how do we do more, bigger, better, faster? Not sure how we do that, but I'm glad there's something going on right now. To the cost effective and the equity goal, I first want to be clear, the equity goal should be around And the city of Portland is very clear around certified firms, so that we're clear about who we're talking about, and that there's a difference between saying it's minority-owned and or women-owned, and it's a certified minority or women-owned firm. And so I want to be clear that the goal would be, as we talk about equity, that we're talking about certified firms, we would be looking at. To that extent, I want to, I don't know, set aside just gets you in a difficult position legally, so I want to be careful about that. But there are tried and tested ways that the city of Portland has used to create opportunities for women and minority businesses in Portland today for housing projects. I mean, if you build a housing project and you get PDC money or the housing money, you have to use contractors, and it's a requirement, and they meet them all the time. So there are methods that could open this up that I think you could work with the city attorneys to get there under certified firms. And the city of Portland has a disparity study that talks about the economic disparities of women and minorities in the city of Portland around banking, around housing, and some of those things that would give you a legal defense in doing this. So I think there's a great opportunity to do that. How you do it, my kind of a part of this would be that the industry and actually the people that testify today get together and try to figure out a solution and come to you. If we have to figure it out, it's going to be not a perfect solution. And I because I work in the industry of doing minority contracting and stuff, they're at times clumsy, especially the first thing out of the gate. And so if industry works with the people that want to get into the industry to figure something out, but I think this is something that can be done because it has been done in other places. And you can create that opportunity. And I don't think that, from what I heard, people are not asking for a handout, they're asking for the opportunity to participate. And that's what the contracting program has done at the city of Portland. The city of Portland is not handing out contracts, it's an opportunity to bid. You're still competitive, you're still providing quality and service and safety and all that, so. And I would go to number 4 and say for women and minority workers, I would look at, the city of Portland has goals for women and minority workers on construction projects today. Those are drivers for whether you're doing dump trucks or something else or concrete. I would think that we'd be able to adopt those and make those as part of a program. And that would be incorporated in their performance as whether or not if they're meeting those goals in their performance. And I would like to see an incentive program around the margins they make, so that they maybe make a minimum, and if they do certain things, in the sense that you have some haulers that give out the 32-gallon or the 35-gallon can free to their customers and other haulers that don't. And there's a efficiency we've heard in the past around the 35 gallons. So I don't understand why all don't, if there's an efficiency and you save money. But if there's an incentive program that you can earn more margin by doing certain things for your customers that benefit us as ratepayers in the city of Portland, I think just providing a standard, you're going to get 9.5% or something, seems to be not an opportunity to really incentivize and get to some of the bigger goals that we're looking at. The other side is, as we look at in creating opportunities for women and minorities, there is the commercial side of this business that's not franchised. And I know that's a big issue, But within that, and we heard today, is the multifamily component. And there seems to me that's a smaller component and an opportunity to create a franchise or franchise opportunities to pull that out of the commercial side and put that into the residential side and basically expand the pie. I don't know if that's possible, but
Great. I think Michelle was next, and then I forgot, Andreas, my bad. And then Michelle, and then it looks like Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Number 4, in the second bullet, the mention to companies, is that a mention to franchises? Reducing barriers to economic opportunities for minority-owned and women-owned companies, is that franchises in that situation?
Well, so currently, companies hold the franchises.
Gotcha.
I think we want to be able to explore opportunities that might be beyond simply the company that holds the franchise. So we're trying to be a little broader, and I think the intent here is to create economic opportunities for those companies. It might be to have a franchise, it might be something else.
Thank you. On the conversation before about the original companies franchises that existed that have collapsed into these 14 franchises, do we know if the areas those serve are adjacent to each other? In other words, is a franchise going to be serving an area that's one area, or might it be jumping around town to pick up different areas that were previously covered by one of the larger number of franchises that was reduced down to 14?
The latter.
Okay. I don't know if there's information about that. I know my partner's from Lincoln, and they have a similar system, and there are a lot of environmental inefficiencies that come from having companies jump across the city. I don't know if there's a good way of addressing that or if it's captured in these goals, but I'd definitely be interested in hearing that. I'd also be interested either now or later in hearing more about, in number 2, bullet 1, the connection between rates and equity as a policy objective.
Okay, so if we go away from, so does the guaranteed rate of return theoretically help a smaller hauler participate because it allows them to defray the cost of the efficient vehicles we're expecting them to be using? And if that's part of the issue here, do we need to incorporate in whatever we do some sort of financing mechanism to help them buy cleaner trucks?
So just to clarify, the 9.5% it's not a guaranteed rate of return,
Okay.
but it is factored into the rates. So they all have to charge the same rates, and then obviously their operating costs vary. So
Right.
some are not getting that, some are getting more than that. I think as we get into this and try to look at what are the options, we'll want to understand is financing either, whether it's the vehicles, other operations to get into the game, or I'll get ahead of myself, but to buy a franchise, if that ends up being an option we want to try to push for, yeah, we absolutely would want to make sure that there's access to the financing required to do whatever it is that gets people in the game.
Okay, and what's the role of the city in the sale of a franchise?
The city council needs to consent to the transfer.
So
we can allow it or we can reject
Okay.
it.
Just
Katie?
one clarification there, and I didn't hear you explicitly ask this, but the cost of, if I was to purchase a franchise, those costs are not allowed in the rates. So that is not an allowable cost.
I get that, but if I have a franchise and I need to go and buy a fleet of vehicles, that's an operating cost. So I come back to you and say, this is what it cost me to provide the service. And so that gets passed on to the public, in theory, to some extent.
Correct.
Yeah, in fact, it feeds into the rate making, yes.
Katie?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the equitable side, I was reading about the Silicon Valley firms, which is way different from garbage hauling, I realize. But they were saying that that they, traditionally in Silicon Valley, they don't have very many women and minorities working in those really great high-paying jobs. And so they were wanting to do better. They're all say they want to do better. The ones that actually have been having success, it isn't coming from training or talking about it. This really has been coming from managers being told that if they don't meet certain guidelines, they won't be promoted, or they won't have a very good rating. They won't get a raise. So building in accountability systems, at least in that industry, really seem to have a big impact. I don't know if that would fit with what you guys are trying to do, but I'd be interested in that.
Eli?
I'm back to looking at the next steps for the recycling program. I'm wondering, since one of the pivotal things for the single-family residential side was pickup frequency. In order to use a trick like that or other tricks that worked in single-family, applying it to multifamily, would you need to have the franchise structure to have that level of supervision of the, or could you do it just regulatorily with the current competitive bidding process? I live in a homeowner association where we bid out and we decide as a group whether we're going to pay for composting or not. So that's a decision we make as an association. As a residential, someone who lives on a lot, they don't get to make that decision. So I guess I'm wondering if you want to actually get the multifamily to make that kind of shift and those kind of gains, whether you have to take the decision-making away from anyway, educate me on that one.
Later. There's a lot of later, but just to note the levels of complexity in the multifamily sector, which we sort of put the label on, but actually it encompasses all sorts of different property types, ownership structures, decision-making, and kind of collection needs, means we really would want to parse it into a bunch of chunks and then explore it.
So are there any other questions? It looks like we've covered that. So as I remember, you guys are hoping to get a letter of support or recommendation from us. And I kind of would put it into my own words, maybe framed around the guiding principles. And do we have additional items to add? We certainly talked about some things or not. Is that correct? Or if I didn't hear any suggestions to remove any, so I think it's just more maybe taking some of those principles and going more in depth with them. I don't know, do we come up with any new ones? I guess maybe it's a better question to ask as we were sitting here around the table, or are they just more furthering the conversation about what you've already framed?
Well, I think we introduced competitive bidding as a concept, and I don't think that's on the list currently.
And I would like to look at like I said, the commercial side. I don't think it's on the list because we're only talking residential here.
And because these are guiding principles for the residential franchise review, I guess my hope is to take that suggestion and sort of think about it as we're trying to address equity across the solid waste system. But I don't know how we could address commercial within a residential franchise. So I think we take that as a larger consideration.
Okay.
So how do you want us to proceed in terms of, would you like us to draft a letter and send it to just you, or send it to the entire group and give you a couple days or a week or
I guess
two
I'd
for
suggest
comments? And
you draft it and send it to the group.
Okay.
And we've got time.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get comments from
Okay.
everybody. And
great.
Thank you very much. This is
Thank you very
helpful,
much.
And likewise to all the folks who testified.
Right.
This is really
yeah, appreciate everybody
appreciate
taking time out of your day to come here and
Travel from
encourage
Seattle.
us to make sure that we are being inclusive and thinking broad. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the Regional Transit Strategy Briefing. Chapter, of course. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, that's live.
And then just go ahead and we'll eject it and I'll.
Okay. Oops. No. That's fine. Yes, come on up. Okay. Okay. Art, are you ready?
Sure.
Only because Michelle asked for me to pass around my beautiful new glasses around so that she could, so other people might need them to read their charts. I do have extra pairs if anybody wants them. Signal me. Oh, I think I did get these, April. Yeah, thank you. Okay,
All right.
let's get rolling. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Art Pierce. I'm Manager of Policy Planning and Projects for the Bureau of Transportation. And here with me today is April Bertelson, who's a senior planner with the Bureau, and Mauricio Leclerc, wherever he just disappeared to, who manages the area and projects team for the Bureau. We're here to give you an update on a whole series of elements. There's been a lot of work that has happened essentially from the time from when the TSP was adopted till now. And so we're trying to fit a lot into this one briefing, so I apologize for the amount of paper and the amount of information, but we're hoping to walk you through it in a understandable fashion. So very quickly, we're going to walk you through the process of what we've been up to. Talk in more detail about a new level of transit that we're calling enhanced transit, and discuss a little bit about how streetcar fits into that specifically. We have some maps that are rolling out what we've developed in collaboration with Metro and TriMet around a new transit vision. And then specifically starting to hone into what this means for the current update to the 2018 RTP. And then your discussion with you specifically as the direction you gave us through the comprehensive plan and the TSP update around having transit serve specific places and specific outcomes. We want your temperature test and flavor response, whether we are on the right track in terms of what we thought we heard your direction and whether we're bringing you back what you expected. One quick reminder about the sort of the cycle of life, as we've been calling it, is that we're always planning. It actually never stops. So even though we say we're adopting a plan, we are actually just beginning into the next cycle. So by the adoption of the transportation system plan that we did last year with your assistance, we immediately turned our direction to the regional process, which is the regional transportation plan. And we're now focused on that process. And out of that process, we will switch right back around to doing the transportation system plan again. And so one of the challenges we always have with these conversations with you is making sure you know which part of this process we're going through. And when we need to take snapshots, understanding that that isn't the final end of this conversation, it is simply what we're able to provide as a current glimpse in one of these cycles back and forth. So specifically where we are now, the areas that we're updating you on today are making sure that you're understanding. I think you've already had a fair amount of understanding of growing transit communities, and there was a briefing in
March.
In March, thank you. And so we're bringing in enhanced transit corridors and streetcar, and helping you understand how that falls into the call for projects and the transit vision and strategy for the RTP update. Another illustration of a similar process, but we are, you can see you're actually called out as a circle right there. It says PSC is going to help us before we head into the RTP process. And we also were here with you a couple times over this spring as well. But this will then feed into a whole series of steps that we'll be doing at the regional level, integrating our recommendations with recommendations coming from other jurisdictions. Your recommendations will also help inform us going to City Council in approximately a month, July 13th. July 13th. And so that's one of the key things that we will be looking for you is some feedback about what council we want to give the City Council in terms of their deliberation on some of these elements. I'm going to pass this over to April. She's going to walk you through this, what we mean by enhanced transit, hopefully get you grounded in that, and then we'll bring you back around to sort of the broader framework as well.
So we did talk a little bit, I introduced the enhanced transit when we were here in May, but it was still the very beginning of the process. And wanted to also just provide a refresher for those who are not able to attend. I will also direct your attention to the first hand, or this handout here on enhanced transit. And I will be touching on various things that are a part of that handout throughout my presentation. So we're positing that this is a new type of transit on the spectrum of transit that stretches from local bus to the light rail of a high-capacity transit or bus rapid transit, where you would have more dedicated transitway and greater investments. And that enhanced transit fits somewhere in the middle. I liken it to we're exploring what middle housing is, we're figuring out what middle transit is. And that it includes both buses and streetcar that fit within our definition of enhanced transit. Characteristics of enhanced transit, to increased capacity, reliability, and transit travel speeds through moderate and capital and operational investments that are both flexible and context sensitive and can be deployed relatively quickly compared to, say, a light rail project. And that it could come in different shapes and sizes. This could be addressing a hotspot or bottleneck with a transit priority treatment. It could be a series of transit priority treatments in a corridor, a segment of a line, if you will, or it could be upgrading a full transit line. So different shapes. And along the bottom here, you'll see various icons that are for different transit priority treatments that are in our toolbox. And I will talk a little bit more about those later. But as a part of this, we are trying to develop a toolbox to help define what enhanced transit is and different treatments we can apply. Here's an example of one, dedicated bus lanes or business access or transit lanes, things that help give transit priority. And now a bit about the plan update. When I was last here, I did share our plan goals, but I wanted to recap. We're developing this plan to help support planned growth in our centers and along the corridors, consistent with the comprehensive plan update. Looking to define and identify enhanced transit corridors within Portland, and establish clear and objective operational performance measures or guidelines and thresholds to define what success looks like on these most heavily used frequent service lines, and so that we can continue to track and identify where improvements are needed. And that will help us guide prioritization of capital and operational investments in enhanced transit. And if ever there was a question of, is this needed? I point your attention to the photo here where you can see several buses stuck in traffic. And what could we do to get them out? Our approach is grounded in understanding transit operations and guided by policy and ridership demand. So we're building on a wealth of TriMet data that they are participating in this planning process and helping us analyze that data as well. And as well as based on a comprehensive plan policy. And this is all shaping our criteria. And so a quick jump over to our analysis indicators, and this is part of our initial criteria, which are also on the handout, a little bit more information about each of these criteria. I just want to highlight, we're looking at average existing weekday transit ridership. So that's today, who's riding the bus and where is it most heavily used. Reliability, which is really getting at congestion. This is where is the bus stuck during peak hour congestion versus its more free-flowing conditions. And the next speed, transit speed, looking at the average speed over the day. So this is where might the bus be, just kind of always slow. And then dwell time, that's time spent at bus stops. And equity, we are focused in on three populations: low-income, people of color, and limited English proficiency. And then future growth, and this is trying to target where do we need to have better transit in the future, both for household and employment, the future density increase. Last time we shared our candidates. This is our refined list of the candidates and segments where we've been analyzing. And then this is the draft results of applying those criteria to those candidate lines, segment by segment. And that's why a line has different colors, because we tied this to TriMet's time point segments. And so the map that you have before you on the back side includes these results. And this is the total score, the larger map. But then you have a smaller map for each of the individual criteria if you want to see how a segment or line performed on individual criteria. And then the list at the bottom includes the ranked list based on the total score by candidate. And this helped us, I would say, the red and the orange, so that higher end of the spectrum is where segments scored the highest, and would indicate to us it is most important to focus in those places. So how did all of this help inform our input to the RTP update? So based on studying these lines and the criteria that we selected, we use this initial analysis to help to shape RTP projects, and then also recommend which ones to advance first. And you'll see more about that as we get into our broader vision. But I did want to tie these two things together, that initial evaluation in this map helped us to identify where might it be most important, both in the near term and long term. And as well as to start shape projects. And some of those are developed in partnership with TriMet-led projects, and then others that could be city-led projects that include bottlenecks, corridors, or whole bus lines. We also have developing a toolbox of treatments, as I mentioned, and just want to give you really a sampler of that. But this whole toolbox is on our website and is in the materials that Julie advanced for us. Again, the dedicated bus line, as well as a business access and transit lane, and we call it BAT lanes. These allow for vehicles to still access adjacent properties and driveways or make turns, so they can share the lane with the bus, but it's limited those who are making local access. The through vehicles would be stacked on the other lane. But this helps the bus get through more quickly. And here's an example where we already have that today, but also in combination with some peak hour or off-peak parking. So this is Southeast Madison. where during the morning peak, no parking is allowed and the bus can flow past the backed up traffic. But then off peak, it is parking. And then a queue jump, another example here. There can be simpler treatments in our toolbox, curb extensions that allow buses to stop in the travel lane and more room for bus stop improvements. Level boarding helps for quicker and easier boarding. Far side bus stops and bus stop consolidation, as well as signal priority. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those things. You can learn more about each of these tools and more tools in the toolbox. So one of the next steps that we are looking to do is to apply this toolbox to explore at a corridor level and learn more about use of this toolbox, at least in the planning stage. We're not yet at the construction. And also think about other modes together. And so we are recommending that we take a closer look at the following lines. That would be a portion of the line 72, most likely 82nd, line 12 on Northeast Sandy, and possibly line 6 if there's enough resources within our planning budget and contract. And then we also identified some opportunities through other planning processes that we could integrate, looking at enhanced transit as well as other efforts. And that includes Line 73 through our Fixing Our Streets 122nd Avenue Safety Improvement Project, the Line 20 portion along Outer Stark in East Portland in combination with our Vision Zero team, and then looking at some key bottlenecks including in the Central City through a Central City multimodal project. So we're trying to feather this in and integrate where we have these opportunities and recognizing these are important places. So certainly would welcome feedback on this, but this is kind of where we're proposing to go next over the summer. We are, in terms of our next steps, we have an open house planned June 21st. Next, and as well as we'll have an online opportunity for input, developing a survey, and visiting various groups, yours truly, you included. And then in addition to testing out the toolbox, we are also going to be refining our methodology to help us identify, monitor, and prioritize improvements, including ongoing over time. We want to have more objective performance measures and thresholds. Then we will be back in the fall with more outreach based on what we come up with over the summer and plan to complete the plan in the winter and go to council winter 2018. And with this, I'm going to turn it back over to Art.
So one of the key questions that we've heard as we're working on enhanced transit and working on this update is, what does this mean to Portland Streetcar? PBOT and the City of Portland, as the owner and a collaborative operator of the streetcar, continue to think that streetcar, I believe that streetcar is part of the vision for transit, and particularly it fits within the enhanced transit portfolio. You heard a briefing, I believe, at the last meeting. Dan Bauer came and relayed some of these, but I thought I'd quickly try to re-articulate some. The focus in the near term for Portland Streetcar has really been focused in on their NS line and the AB loops and getting those operating efficiencies working well. In fact, employing some of those enhanced transit tools. You're already seeing some of those in use along the streetcar line to get the streetcar moving more quickly and with more frequency. So we're at a 15-minute frequencies, 7.5 in the Central City. And so I think we're strengthening the core operations of the streetcar and preparing it for a conversation around where might be the appropriate expansion. Some key things I think to recognize around streetcar. One is that there's a direct correlation between the adjacent housing units and the ridership of the streetcar system, showing that it really is serving those adjacent households in their daily functioning of their daily lives. And that in one key fact is that 1/3 of all affordable housing in Portland is within a quarter mile of Portland Streetcar. So it is very much serving a population that very much needs that type of transit service. And the other one, 66% of all streetcar trips are beginning at home, meaning that the people really are using it as their direct access to transit. Some of these facts were very new to me. I really had considered it much more heavily connected with with tourism. And so it's been pretty interesting to learn more about it. In the short term, Portland Streetcars has really been focusing in on those investments around the existing system, and in particular getting more streetcars themselves to make sure that we're able to provide better and better service, as well as changes that are happening in the system down in South Waterfront, also around I-5 Rose Quarter, and then working on those transit congestion issues that we see. And then included in this vision is anticipation of some extensions to Hollywood and Montgomery Park are really coming out as the top benefit lines that would fit within the framework. And then other corridors are included overall in that ETC planning as a potential mode that we might choose to deploy for those corridors. Should we pause for a moment? That was a lot we just gave you all. Any key questions on where we are so far before we jump up a layer? Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. Firstly,
Yeah.
this thing is a thing of beauty. It's very cool because you have a lot of information on there represented in a nice little graphic way
Right.
that
Yeah.
could make me ask you a question.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
my question is, so you have your quarters ranked by total score, and so number one is this Rose Quarter to North Killingsworth, and it's not very different from the next one down. But that first one didn't make the list of the three, and I just wondered if there was something horrible about that street that you just didn't want to look at it, or what?
No, that is not the case. There's multiple factors that went into selecting which corridors to focus on with the toolbox, and that part of it was a typological approach. Let's pick some streets that look a bit different, but that may represent more streets. And so that fed into the corridors, as well as they have a segment that scored high or scored high overall. So it's both that segment approach as well as the total score, which you're looking at, and then trying to pick streets that may help us learn different things, applying the toolbox. We could still look at the four corridor. We have an idea of some of the things we may do based on the Williams project, and so maybe there's something we can do on Vancouver. But it was more, I think, there was compelling things about the other corridors to try to tackle.
Two things. First, I'm a huge fan of this. I just think this is good work. The intersection of, I guess, buses and streetcar, I'm just not sure of how that works. And I would just point out the 12 line.
Yes, right.
That streetcar said, you just said they're going to do there, but we're also looking at buses. So I don't know what takes precedent. But because of that intersection, part of the evaluation should be housing. Because as you look at, if it's streetcar, there's clearly a housing component there. I think the enhanced buses is also going to be realized by developers as having a housing advantage in terms of transit. Maybe not as much as a streetcar, but certainly an advantage to have your development on that type of a street. Sure. And so how does housing connect into there? But I would say overall, this is the right direction. I like the evaluation criteria. I'm happy to see that East County got some love in this thing, to say the least. And I don't know if that's intentional or just it ranked out that way, but I'll take it.
A little bit of both. We heard you. We heard you. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's some data and measures that back up the importance.
Yeah, it's good when the two things come together. Right.
So Michelle and then Andres.
So I think the first slide had like bus lane control, and then there was the bus with access.
Right.
Is the idea that we would always have bus with access to properties that take vehicular access off of that street? Or do you think there may be cases where it's just dedicated to bus?
Probably will very much depend on the specifics of the street. In some streets, it also will relate to the provision of parking on the street as well. So it's a mix of all those tools. It's going to be very much location-based.
Okay, then the one comment I would have, just take a look at ORS. I think it's 105-850. There are additional costs associated if you're taking access off of certain types of properties, so just heads up.
Yep.
So going off what Andre was saying, I really appreciated the information about 1/3 of the city's affordable housing being on the streetcar route. I was curious if there was an idea of what rate of riders are from that affordable housing, and what that concentration of affordable housing would be along the ideas for expansion.
Hey, Dan, I don't know if you have a quick answer to any of those.
And if you could please state your name, thanks.
I'm Dan Bauer, Executive Director of Portland Streetcar Inc. One of the slides we didn't include this time, sorry, my mic keeps moving around on me. It's fine. Chases all over the room, it's fine. What we know about the ridership of the streetcar is our riders, the demographics of our riders match the demographics of the census tracts adjacent to the streetcar line across the board. That is true of income, gender, any other demographic you want. I think it's about 23% of our riders make less than $20,000 a year. Now, you had a second part of your question. I forget what it was. Yeah, well, it's an interesting conversation. I think when we look about Montgomery Park, we're potentially going through a master planned community already in Conway. So there's a lot of housing there, but there's less room to negotiate because it's already been master planned. I think there's some zoning challenges further in Northwest. There's some opportunities further up by Montgomery Park, where if we wanted to unlock more zoning and more capacity, there's certainly opportunities there for housing. I think the more challenging piece will be along Northeast Broadway and having conversations with those communities about increased density and opportunities to support the streetcar vision in that community. Plenty more to come on that.
And then on the 12 for the enhanced transit corridor, it seemed like the portion, kind of going off of the graphic again, seemed to get a lower score than some other portions on the map. So I was wondering what other factors went into choosing that as one of the top two priorities.
I would point to that the line 12 overall did score in the top half. And so the other part of it is the nature of the streets, being at an angle street, and that we know there's many modal interests, and there's on-street parking. And so we wanted to pick a street that had some different existing conditions and contexts that was different from other corridors that we picked. And so that was part of it, that taking that typological approach. But it was also that it had segments that did overall scored a bit higher. And the opportunities, it seemed like there were some good opportunities to apply the toolbox.
So Chris and then Katie.
So I want to echo Andre's comments, both that this is excellent work and that housing is a vitally important nexus for streetcar, as is job access. I want to add to that. I want to explore a little bit more about then how that fits into the enhanced transit conversation. When we were discussing streetcar specifically here a couple months ago, I expressed that while I appreciate that Montgomery Park to Hollywood is the project that, for a variety of reasons, is sort of ready to happen, that either MLK or Sandy might more broadly advance those housing and job access goals. So when you're looking at MLK in the 6 and 12 Sandy, as I understand it, the enhanced transit is largely a mobility-focused analysis. I'm not sure how you arrive at whether a streetcar is appropriate or not based purely on mobility. You have to then look at the development potential as well. So how would you get those additional factors into that question? I'm kind of hoping those corridors will blossom for streetcar in the future, not in years 1 to 10 certainly, but I have some hope for 10 to 20. So how would the potential of streetcar rise up there if it doesn't make it just on mobility?
So I think that part of the benefit of having the enhanced transit umbrella sort of capturing either mode. I mean, the other thing that the Portland area doesn't have, but could, is articulated buses. And so there's a variety of vehicle tools that can be sort of part of looking at what's the future of those streets. And I think you're right, there's a series of evolutionary steps that we need to be anticipating. So if it's not year 1 through 10, what should we still do in year 1 through 10 that could have us ready for potentially those next leaps as the city evolves? So I think it's embedded in the conversation. I'm not sure that we have articulated the methodology of exactly what will be those bump thresholds as much as it is the benefit of having Portland Streetcar as a partner helps us to have this sort of iterative interaction occurring. Yeah.
And I would just end on adding that doing enhanced transit improvements to the bus lines does not preclude that, and may help have that be a viable corridor for development, and then can move to grow to another generation of another mode.
Katie?
I have so many questions, I don't even know where to start. But one thing, I have been hearing a lot about the division, and you have it down here as Division Rapid, and actually they took Rapid away from it because it's apparently not going to be any faster. It will just be higher capacity. And so I'm just wondering, I've been a little disappointed in all of the fuss and unhappiness that there's been about that particular line. And so I'm just wondering, are you guys learning from that? And what are you learning from that? And it's really fun to see these different configurations, et cetera, but are we really going to be getting something for these upgrades? Will people be able to get downtown or to where they want to go faster because of these bus systems? We know it works with light rail, but it looks like East Portland is mostly getting the bus systems. So talk to me about that.
There's a lot packed.
There's a lot packed in there. I would say just one thing to touch on, and I'll let April go later.
Sorry,
No, it's okay.
because I have the same feeling. It's like,
no, I think
oh my God.
Really the intention that drove us to start to look into enhanced transit was some of that same challenge, is that we are seeing ridership increasing on the light rail system, but we haven't been seeing it as much on the bus system. And as a city grows, we don't believe that's acceptable. I mean, so at the very core, we have been trying to pursue exactly that dilemma. The Division Street itself, I think, is a challenge based on its narrow right-of-way. So a lot of it will depend on how much flexibility we have on the street
well, I'm
segments.
talking about outer division. It isn't quite as narrow, is it?
Outer division, we will, I think.
Okay, because I don't live on it, so I haven't memorized
But
it.
I think that's part of
Yeah.
the challenge, and part of what we're trying to get better as this region of is really understanding and using these tools that we haven't used as much. If you go to Seattle, there's a lot of these tools being employed, in part because they didn't pursue light rail until very recently. So they kind of did the opposite of what we're doing. We're now jumping in on a thing that they've been doing for about 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want you to know that I'm, I'm not gee whiz about these tools at this point.
Okay.
So, I'm wanting to be convinced by the quality of the projects that you put together.
fair.
And then the other thing that I did want to talk about was just the housing thing. We just had Southwest Corridor here, and it was like, wow, they were doing all this amazing study on making sure that communities were at least had a possibility of staying intact while the region grew.
Right.
So what is in place for these things?
And
Because they probably won't have, as Andres or Chris said, maybe not the same impact, but they're going to have a big impact.
Right. One of the benefits we have here is that they is actually the same us. It's just a different seating of us. So those are the same staff that are working on Southwest Corridor are also connected here as well. What we haven't, I think, perfected is what are the right set of tools to bring to the right scale of project. And that's true not just for transit, but for transportation improvements in general. And so that, I think that is, as we're heading into this next phase of looking at what it means to improve transit in terms of existing service or bus service, what is the right complementary set of actions that we should be bringing along, and how do we fund those complementary actions?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I
that
think
is
it's really
really that question that I just asked was really what I was talking about earlier when I said I would like us to be involved in getting projects started, if at all possible, because I would really like to see more done around housing in East Portland. I almost think all of East Portland needs to get a project that is the equivalent of the Southwest Corridor's attention on housing. I don't know. That's what I would like to see, though. And and then
couple
the
things-
other, just one more thing. The other thing is that I love this whole thing about the quarters ranked by total score, but there's a lot buried in there. It is a, you know, I mean, I don't know how you decided that this was red and this was blue. So I'm hoping that more of that will be
And
forthcoming.
we're going to let Eric speak for a second. I do want to let you know that we have some more we want to share with you. In
Am
part,
I going to like that part?
I think you are. I hope so. I hope so. But I think we definitely are happy to talk as much about this piece, but I want to make sure we get to that
Yeah,
next piece. as
okay.
well. Yeah.
Before I pass, if I may, I think there's good to clear up, Katie, in terms of the performance of the division project, and there is an anticipation that it will have increased speed and shorter travel times, that there is a travel time savings. I've seen percentages, I think 15 to 20. I think that was more of an less emphasis because of the disappointment. But I will turn this over to Eric.
Sure, thanks. I mean, in some ways, that's what I wanted to note. Hello, Eric Hesse with TriMet Planning and Policy, and I'm the project management team liaison for the Enhanced Transit Corridors, also our Regional Transportation Plan lead, as well as co-leading with Jamie Snook, who's here from Metro, the Regional Transit Strategy piece as well. And I did just want to, assert that in fact our modeling does show a 20% travel time savings in that corridor. So we'll see what happens when we actually get on the street, but that's the best we know now. And so just wanted to let the record show that. And I think part of what we've also been learning from that process is that we recognize there has been some disappointment about some of the things that we thought might be possible that then were not possible within the budget that both the federal programs allow and that we were able to muster here. And so part of what we're also learning and part of what this work plan to our mind represents is trying to do as much work up front to understand where the toolkit really can be applied in ways that we know we could deliver those, so that then as people are understanding what they may be seeing coming down, it's not sort of taken away. I think so much of that was a grander vision that then sort of continued to shrink and shrink and shrink. I think there's still going to be strong benefits there, and we see really good performance as Seattle and Minneapolis and others have applied these tools. So hopefully we'll continue to be able to share that with you, so that you can be more gee-whiz about it. But we've seen a third increase in ridership on the network, for example, that Seattle's built here, and so people are clearly responding to it in a way that I think really shows that those riders perceive a difference in that. So anyway, just wanted to take the opportunity to share that. Thank you.
So I've got a couple hands out. You've got how much longer to present? Would you guess?
Quickly, I think we can do an arc back up and down and maybe inform some of the questions, but also give you the full package before we go any farther. So,
does that work, Michelle and Eli?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to sort of take you back up to the heights again, just to remind you some of the grounding. So within the Metro 2040 growth concept, transit was anticipated as essentially the key organizing principle around how we're going to organize our region rather than around freeway corridors or around other concepts. So transit is the anchor to the vision of what we are deploying both regionally and locally. The focus of that really has been on those regional transit light rail corridors. And so what this process really represents is pushing down to another layer down of granularity of understanding the workhorse role and needs of the smaller set of the system, not just the major light rail system, and the need for us to really support and emphasize that system. The map that's being updated through the 2018 RTP, which is part of what we're bringing projects to, this is what was enacted in 2019. You'll see the emphasis on some of these larger corridors, Southwest Corridor being included. But really with Portland's push, but I think the collaboration of TriMet and Metro, we're pushing down a layer into this finer granularity of understanding the importance of those other lines and what types of investments and enhancements might be required. So what we have for you today, we think is quite exciting. We're excited about it. Is the set of maps that are really trying to capture what we think is the next era of transit investment for Portland and we think it can really support the region as well. And it really is one grounded more in smaller, more partnership-based moves, where we are trying to work more quickly through that cycle rather than spending many, many years on making one big capital move happen. I think we're still very committed to Southwest Corridor as a future investment, but we know that alone will not be enough to get us there. So there's 3 11x17 maps that were in your pile of paper. So quickly trying to articulate. So the first one, which is the red and orange map here, is showing that we're, by dropping down a layer, able to show you both what we're showing in red are the high capacity transit moves, which are the ones that would be familiar. I think some key ones to look at there, the red line extension, both to the airport and out to Hillsborough, Southwest Corridor, future extension to Vancouver, but also the articulation that Powell needs to be thought of as a long-term major move for transit as well. Then dropping down a layer, we're showing all of these corridors that are in this enhanced transit corridors portfolio of the importance of those. And then even at the sort of center of the system, you'll see some key new ideas, one being the steel bridge, importance of enhancements to the steel bridge, but also in purple, the articulation of a future Central City high-capacity tunnel. So really the next move, and that's, we think, out of the constrained environment, but we think it is still important to capture that's a move that we anticipate happening. Bus tunnel, or but transit tunnel, light rail, yeah, right. So then, starting to break that down in terms of timeline, what does this mean in terms of near-term versus long-term moves? So in dark green, for this map, it is showing what's being anticipated for the years 1 through 10. So some key lines that you'll see there, you see MLK, Sandy, 122nd, Southwest Corridor, of course, as being the near-term moves that we're anticipating. And then in the year 11 through 20, it starts to capture some of those elements in terms of 82nd and Killingsworth, perhaps the addition of the extension to Vancouver in that timeline, but also the Burnside and Hawthorne lines and Foster lines all seeing additional increased capacity. Also, seeing here, you'll see that TV Highway is a high priority for the Washington County and Hillsborough and Beaverton, so we're showing that as well. And then on the strategic end, which is the end sort of outside of what we think we can fund, but we want to make sure that we're understanding that that's out there on the horizon, are a series of moves that do include enhancements to 33rd as well as on Powell and other lines. What does this mean specifically to Portland? What are the lines that Portland will be anticipating that we're the leaders on? Is the third map, and this is really just calling out a set of lines that we know that in the near term we're going to need to put our energy. And so those are looking at the 122nd along 82nd Avenue, on Powell, Cesar Chavez, along is that MLK or 4? It's the 4. There's the 4, right. As well as to St. John's. And then the streetcar extensions are also a key part of that, part of the puzzle. A lot of these are near-term moves that may be anticipating the complementary larger regional move long-term, but this is really around where do we think city attention and actually sort of city-governed tools can really help transit in the near term be competitive and win. So back up to the discussion. So we're back to you in terms of some of the feedback we've already been getting, but I think we really want to make sure that we understand areas where you think that we're on the right track versus, and also where there might be gaps in terms of how this will fit against Portland's comprehensive plan. And also, one of the key directions that you gave us was this notion of inner ring and outer ring transit studies. We think we've captured that through really looking more deeply at what's the right set of tools for East Portland specifically, but welcome feedback on that as well. Oh, I forgot them. Oh, sorry, good note, thank you. One of the things I missed, there's a lot on this map, is also, you'll see these orange circles in the center of the central city. Those are really key portals to the bridges in the central city. Those are very important, but also probably a very challenging location where it's going to take some very assertive attention on our part to get transit in and out of the central city with speed. So that's another key move that we know we need to lead and step up and help make. So, all right. So feedback.
Great. So we had Michelle lined up, then Eli, and Chris has since raised his hand.
Okay. So I'm more in the gee whiz camp because I think it's really cool. And part of it is I just think we have a lot less confidence in what the feds are going to do in terms of funding. And all those projects are so big and they're so far out. I thought it was cool looking at things like what smart things can we do with the existing right-of-way? You know, things like, do we have the bus stop on the right side of the intersection? Can we bump out the bus stop to meet in the roadway? And I think those are the types of improvements that you can see a quick change for more people getting in the bus because they actually see that, hey, the bus is streaming along and I'm stuck in traffic, which has gotten incredibly worse in the time I've been in Oregon. So I think it's very cool, and I appreciate sort of the creativity and just sort of the smart, small bites that I think cumulatively can make a huge impact.
Eli?
I also probably more the gee whiz side, but I want to understand the trade-offs. I've seen maps showing a TriMet line Y and Z as hypothetical future lines, and I've seen that because I live near one of them, right? And it would actually bring direct, without having to transfer from Coley to downtown, for example. Is that the sort of thing, since it's on none of these maps, that it becomes the short end of the trade? Or share more information about that would be great.
I'm going to turn it to Eric with TriMet.
Thanks for the question, Eli. That's a good one. These are in part because we're here talking about both the context of the Enhanced Transit Corridors Plan and the RTP update, which at least this part is focused on the capital projects list. This is a subset of, I'd say, what we're proposing to do. And those are very much, those service enhancement plan visions very much remain our 20-year service vision as well. And as you all may know, the conversations going down in Salem right now about the transportation package include significant potential expansion of the operations funding, which would let us accelerate the implementation of those. So I think your question of trade-off is a good one. Our intent is to continue to use the operating dollars that we have to fund as many of those as we can. I think where the trade-off might occur is in how rapidly we might increase the frequencies of these enhanced lines to meet the demand that is there already, and that we think these improvements might continue to generate additional demand on. And that's also part of the work that in the next steps is alluded to, of us understanding what our triggers and thresholds are for these service, basically an exchange of service improvement from our side on the operations budget, which we control, to the improvements in the capital infrastructure on the and the facilities that the city controls, or the state in some instances. And so I think that that's something we'll probably continue to come back with to help highlight how we've defined some of those thresholds, and I think that would be a great place to weigh in and see how those trade-offs feel. And then we'll also have a better sense of our budget and whether we have an additional substantial amount of new funding to be able to have a less of a forced trade-off there. I mean, our intent, though, is to continue to implement those lines as best we can, and we've already been doing so. So thank you for raising that.
Chris?
Follow up if there's others.
Thank you.
So Ray Polani is finally vindicated. For those of you who aren't old enough to know, Ray Polani spent several decades advocating for a downtown transit tunnel. So it was a question of not whether if he was going to be right, but when he was going to be right. So we're getting there. Again, I applaud the vision, join my colleagues in that, and I think you have answered the inner ring, outer ring questions, so thank you. I'm a little bit curious about the Powell line. We started out with Powell Division, which collapsed the division, and then we got to the lower expectations even a little bit more. In my mind, one of the reasons that happened is that we wouldn't consider exclusive lanes on Powell. Is this a marker saying we're going to revisit that conversation, or what's going to make Powell work in the future when it didn't work this time around?
Can't tell whether April's going to take the mic or give it to me.
How badly do you want the mic? So I think we did learn much from division, and that I feel we need to proceed cautiously and with not too much excitement about what we may be able to achieve, particularly when the road is not currently ours.
Mm-hmm.
That said, the need is there, and so for transit, but also other modes. It's a high crash corridor. There's multimodal needs. And so I think the next step is really to begin a corridor refinement plan. And so that has been identified, I think, amended into the 2014 RTP with the adoption of the Division Street LPA, saying that we need to go back to Powell. And through that corridor refinement plan, we really start to look at what may be more feasible, whether that is something that is more dedicated right-of-way, on the street, elevated options, I think that need to be explored much more than we could today in the current studies.
All right, I was happy to hear that there seem to be some pointers towards jurisdictional transfer for Powell in the current state transportation package that's being negotiated. I will take a moment to, since we're talking about the regional plan here, bemoan the continued regional fixation with freeway projects, the dollars for which could go a long way towards making some of these happen, but we're not there yet.
Additional questions, comments? Andreas?
Looking at the RTP project list, I see a lot of east-west routes, and it reminds me of the conversation of how it's easier to get east-west than north-south, particularly on the east side, and I was wondering how that's factored into conversations about upcoming plans.
So I think that we also do have north-south lines there, and a number of them. So hoping that what we're doing here is establishing a grid of transit, that we're both strengthening the east-west lines as well as the north-south lines, and that the more that we can create that connected grid with all of those being strong lines, we're increasing people's access to way more wherever they're going. And so I think we would be unfortunate if we didn't strengthen both, that it's really a network we're building. But we do hear the need for stronger north-south lines, and certainly, hopefully, you'll see that on some of our near-term projects, we're saying let's advance those and strengthen those lines.
Any additional questions? Thank you very much. I am also, I'm gee whiz. I am excited. I think Michelle said it well, so I don't even need to repeat it, that they're all steps towards improving in its progress, and it's great to see the effort and the thought that's gone into it. So thank you very much. It's also amazing to see how many transportation planners are sitting out here right now.
This is our people.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you very
Yes,
much.
It took an army to produce
Yes.
this. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So next on the agenda is the Transportation System Plan Stage 3 briefing.
No, we'll just go with it. Thank you, though. It may not be our latest and greatest. What do I do? How do I get it? Sorry. Was I talking to the microphone? Sorry. Wow. Thanks, Julie. Just want to open somebody something rather than be. Can you? Okay, we did it as a PDF. Okay. Okay.
Wow, you guys cleared the room.
We're not nearly as gee whiz.
I'm just as excited.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad. Okay. Hi, I'm Courtney Duke with the Bureau of Transportation, and we're here to talk about the Transportation System Plan update Stage 3, which is the final stage of the TSP update. With me right now are Francesca and Zeph, but we're going to have some more people come up to present their sections. I'll stay up here the whole time to help answer questions, but we will have a little bit of shifting as people talk about their sections. Okay, so we're at the briefing. What do I do? There we go. All right. So we wanted, for some people that I know that are new to transportation, full screen. Sorry. Okay, yeah, go for it. That's fine. That's your job, to help us with that, to have it be bothered by it and help us.
If I could figure it out.
Okay,
Full
that's fine.
screen, there it is.
All right, yay, thank you. So Erin, she'll be back up to talk about the digital document, and as you can tell, she'll be well qualified. So we just want to give a quick background again on the relationship of the transportation system plan to other plans and policies. Again, I know some of you have been involved with our update from the very beginning and others are new. And we're always available to answer questions directly on the phone or via email if you have additional questions or want clarification. So just a quick relationship. So we have, the statewide planning goals. There's 19 statewide planning goals, and goal 12 is the transportation goal. At some point before my time, the state decided that we weren't meeting that goal very well, so they decided to write some rules for us to meet that goal. So that was the transportation planning rule, and from that was requirements to do transportation system plans throughout the state. So we've got regulations and rules that we need to meet from the state level, and you can see in the blue that that's what we're working on, and that's a lot of what we're working on in this update. But we also need to meet the regional transportation plan from Metro, so we also have requirements from Metro that we're meeting. We were also, and we'll get into some more details of how we were a part of the comprehensive plan, but we're also a part of the city's comprehensive plan. I was a team member on that, as well as a number of the other staff working with that, and that's when I saw some of you before. But we also have the Portland Plan and the Climate Action Plan feed into all of our work. And then we have a number of additional modal plans and neighborhood plans and action plans that both feed into the TSP and sort of feed out of the TSP. So again, we have the bike plan for 2030. We have our old PED master plan, but we're doing update to that right now, and you might get a briefing on that later. And then and our Portland Progress, which is our internal strategic plan. All of these things are fitting into the transportation system plan. So quickly to show the components of the, of the TSP. So we updated the TSP in 3, where was the other one? Sorry, okay. So this is the TSP. If you have one at your desk, there are 3 binders filled with all this great information about the transportation system plan. But these are the components of the TSP, and this is how we updated it generally. So I'll go through how we updated it in the 3 different components. So in stage 1, we were a part of the comprehensive plan update, which was also called Task 4 for those of you who were involved in that, and we worked closely with Eric Engstrom and the comp plan team. And the things that are in blue were what we updated in stage 1. So we did our goals and policies, which were mainly chapter 9, which is the transportation goals, but we also had quite a few transportation policies in chapters 2, 4, 8, and as well as we were very supportive and made changes to the public engagement, community engagement chapter 2. We also did our transportation system plan improvements, and that was the major project list and our programs, and also our financial plan and a project evaluation criteria to get to those lists. So those were all adopted by City Council in June of 2016. They have just been submitted to the state recently, and there were no transportation appeals at the state level. So nothing related to transportation was appealed, so that was exciting. So then we did stage 2, which was also a part of the comprehensive plan update. This was what was called Task 5 for those folks who know about our state mandated work plan. So these are the things that are in orange here on this page. So we made some updates to our introduction and the glossary. Those had not been updated since 2002. So there were some components that were just completely out of date, as well as some words we don't use anymore for planning. We made some changes to the community involvement chapter of our own to reflect what happened in chapter 2 of the comp plan. Francesca was the lead on that for us. We made some changes to the performance measures, as well as some bicycle objectives to help be in alignment with the bicycle plan of 2030. We made some street classification changes, mainly related to the bicycle, again, to be in alignment with what's already been adopted, as well as what are called street design classifications. These were really related to urban design and related to the centers and corridor strategy of the comp plan. We made some changes to our refinement plans and studies. Luckily, we had done quite a few of those plans and studies, so we were able to delete quite a few of those, as well as add some that we felt we needed to help meet the comp plan. And we made some updates to the master street plans, which again were mainly housekeeping for things that had been adopted before. We also made some changes to some zoning and some code language related to transportation demand management and street vacations, as well as some stuff in the commercial parking code. And that was adopted in 2016 by council and is, I believe, has been submitted to the state. Eric can answer exactly where we're at on that, but I think that's been submitted. So now we're in stage 3. We're in green for go to be almost done. So we've been working on that. So again, we've got some objectives that we're working on, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, specifically related to geographic areas, as well as just additional objectives that might need to be updated. We're looking at the transit, emergency response, and traffic classification changes. There's some updates that we need to do the South Waterfront Master Street Plan, and Steve Sigathy is here to talk about that in a couple minutes, as well as the post office site. We need to work on some relationships to our modal plans. Those are what the state requires us to have. There's also some more implementation strategies that we're looking at. And then we have some work related to autonomous vehicles and performance measures that we're also looking at. And again, staff will come up and talk about all of these in just a minute. So, any questions on that part? Got it. Everybody, we'll have a quiz later. What are we working on? Okay. So just a quick background on TSP objectives and just goals, policies, and objectives, just sort of what they are to get a little grounding in what they are. So we put this up here. I'm not going to necessarily read all of it, but as I mentioned, we have goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. And then we have specific objectives and statements that carry out the plan in the short term as objectives. They help assess incremental progress towards achieving the broader purposes expressed in the goals and policies. So we made some changes to objectives in stage 2, especially as it related to the bike plan. But we're also just sort of looking at objectives generally as a part of this update. So the comprehensive plan, we made this as just goals and policies. There are no objectives in the comp plan. But a lot of those goals and policies were developed from the existing objectives. So a number of objectives that you may see were elevated, as you might say, into those goals and policies or combined into something that we thought was important, Vision Zero being an example. Again, a number of objectives were updated as a part of stage 2. And right now, in the current draft, we have classifications and geographic policies that have objectives, as well as a whole chapter of objectives. But, oops, sorry, wrong way. There has been a question coming up as a part of our internal review of do we need objectives? Again, the comprehensive plan doesn't have them. We have quite a few existing plans and programs, some of which you've seen, that are adopted by the city, that maybe those sufficiently implement the goals and policies of the comp plan. Those other plans are adopted by resolution by City Council, while objectives are adopted by ordinance. So that's just something to think about. And so some would say that those objectives create additional pressure and have a legal hook to move goals and policies forward. So we don't necessarily today want to have the big discussion of do we need them or do we not, but we want you to know that that's something that we're thinking about as a part of the review. But the document that's out in the community right now has modifications, changes, deletions, just related to keeping them in the document for now. Sorry, I keep going the wrong way. Okay, so as a part of those objectives, we had geographic policies. And so Francesca is going to talk about the changes and the proposals that we've made as a part of that.
Yeah, so really, I'm just going to give you an overview of this. Basically, the 2007 TSP includes policy objectives for each of 8 transportation districts. The comp plan recognizes a new kind of geographic distinction. Those are the 5 pattern areas identified for having unique qualities that differentiate them and create their sense of place. So for this task of the Stage 3 update, policies for the 8 transportation districts were audited and reoriented towards the 5 pattern areas. So now that we have the comp plan, the central city plan, and stages 1 and 2 of the TSP update complete, we wanted to see if any of the content is now addressed by other bigger superseding or overarching policies. Each district policy was cross-referenced to related comp plan, central city, and or previously updated TSP policies. And we found that many of the 2007 district objectives are now addressed in this way. So we wanted to try not to repeat ourselves with objectives that are already covered by our recent key policy work. We also wanted to take out the things that have been done already, move objectives that aren't specific to the constraints of a geography, and make sure that we aren't keeping anything in this section that's actually a project, because we already have a list of projects that came out of stage 1 of the TSP update. So we reviewed past local and area plans and developed new objectives where we found additional guidance was needed, or in order to address lessons learned and fulfill plan recommendations from all those many smaller plans that we've done over time. PBOT staff and BPS staff, the district liaisons in particular, helped us review the district objectives and the pattern area objectives as they were reorganized. During our in-house draft stage, we even had review help from a few members of the public who served on our community transportation expert group from stages 1 and 2 of the TSB update. So they give us feedback then that was also helpful, and we'll continue to hear from the public during the discussion draft stage. So pending public feedback on this discussion draft, objectives that are presently repeated in multiple pattern areas will be considered for inclusion in the overall TSP objectives section. Having said that, that means they'll also be a part of the conversation to keep or not keep those objectives overall.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. So Zeph is here to talk about the street classification changes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Zeph Wagner. I'm a planner at PBOT. Been helping out with the street classifications update. Just a basic overview of street classifications is that they provide policy guidance for the desired function of streets. And what that generally means is, how are we prioritizing streets for different types of trip length and purpose? So the best example is just with traffic. We have local streets that primarily serve local access, not through trips. We have collectors that kind of serve the in-between, medium length trips, accessing neighborhood destinations and accessing the higher classification streets. And then we have major city traffic streets and freeways that are really more for the longer distance trips across the city or across the region. And they all work together in a system, and we have that for every mode. And as Courtney mentioned, bicycle and street design classifications were already updated in the stage 2. What we have in the discussion draft is updating the traffic, transit, and emergency response classifications. We're not updating the pedestrian and freight classifications at this time because we have a pedestrian master plan update underway, starting its planning process. So that'll be taking a close look at the classifications and whether we need new categories of classification and changes to the maps. And we're also planning sometime in the next several years to update the freight master plan, and we recently applied for funding to do that update. So I'll just cover kind of the basics of what we're proposing for, in this discussion draft for those 3 modes. So for traffic, the main goals here was we heard from our Vision Zero team that we really needed to start incorporating safety into the language. There was a lot of language in the descriptions about the function of the street, but not a lot about just emphasizing the need for safety. And so, and we also wanted to clarify that traffic calming tools can be used on both neighborhood collectors and local service streets. There was a concern that a lot of streets have been, in past TSPs, classified as a local street in order to get traffic calming, but the street doesn't feel like a local street. It's important in the network of collectors, and everybody sort of knows that we don't intend on fully restricting access to it. And so we wanted to make sure that people know that neighborhood collectors, as the lowest category of collector, is eligible for traffic calming. And so this is just an example of how we talk about safety being the highest priority, and that's kind of interwoven through all the classifications with some slightly different language for each one. And then emphasizing that traffic calming tools can be used to improve neighborhood safety and livability on neighborhood collectors. And The higher order classifications usually need more of a street redesign to lower speeds rather than our usual traffic calming things like speed bumps. And then here's an example of just a part of the city that has a fair number of changes for traffic from before and after. And I'll draw your attention to this example on the left is Willamette Boulevard going around the bluff. Our previous TSP, or our existing TSP, has an odd gap in Willamette Boulevard, and we don't really have any intention on putting a diverter there or completely blocking that street, and so we want to be more upfront with the public about our intentions for that. We also had a section of Woolsey there classified as a neighborhood collector, and now it's a neighborhood greenway. So that's an example of sort of cleanup. In the middle there's an example of an odd jog where Greeley is a neighborhood collector, and then Denver was, and then back to Portsmouth. And so, again, a little bit of cleanup, just acknowledging that Greeley is an important street in the traffic network, whereas Denver, we've been doing a lot of traffic calming and slowly kind of converting it into more of a local street. And then Mississippi and Albina there is an example of where if we're doing a project on a street and our engineers look at our classifications, it's very confusing for them to have that be classified as a local street when they know that it's carries a fair amount of traffic. It definitely functions as a neighborhood collector. It carries transit, things like that. So we're kind of making this describe a little more accurately our intentions for the streets. For transit, the main thing was updating the descriptions to emphasize access to transit improvements and transit priority. This was already in there, but as the previous discussion mentioned, we were really trying to focus on improving transit. And so this is an example of just some new language for major transit priority streets, emphasizing safe and convenient access, safe and accessible pedestrian crossings at all transit stops, which right now we definitely haven't achieved, but that's our goal. And having transit signal priority, improving transit stops, making clear the trade-offs that on certain corridors we really want to do what we can to improve transit. And this is an example of the maps. The biggest change in the maps is updating to reflect the TriMet Service Enhancement Plan. So I think Eli might have mentioned some of the new lines in the area. And so like one example is on Columbia Boulevard. We're proposing to upgrade that to a higher classification because TriMet is now planning to extend a new bus line along Columbia Boulevard to provide access to those jobs. So we want to reflect that. Another change is deleting the community transit street classification. This was a lower level classification that was describing sort of a on-demand dial-a-ride service that never really materialized from the previous TSP. But now TriMet is looking at somewhat of a similar model, but not tied to fixed routes. So shuttles that might serve an entire area. And so this is an example from their service enhancement plan that shows those service areas. So it doesn't really fit well with classifications. So we're just making sure that local transit streets can kind of cover that use. And then another quite a big change is emergency response. There's been a lot of concerns that from the Fire Bureau that we needed a secondary response network, which we've never had before, in case the major response routes get disrupted for some reason. So, so we're proposing a new classification for secondary emergency response. They wouldn't be the ones that the fire trucks and response vehicles normally use, but they could use as an alternative. And what we would be doing here is clarifying that on these secondary routes, we would be able to use fire-friendly speed bumps just by policy. We could use them on those streets. Whereas for major response routes, we would still need to negotiate with the Fire Bureau. Right now, on any response street, we have to do a negotiation every time, and that can kind of slow down our efforts to do traffic calming. So here's some examples, like Stark is not on the map at all right now, and the Fire Bureau requested that as a secondary response route. And then you can see there next to Ladd's Addition, there was a long gap between response routes from 12th Avenue to Cesar Chavez. And so the Fire Bureau really requested some kind of a designated route through there. 20th Avenue made sense because it connects a longer route, but then we also have a secondary route to the east.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the end of my.
Years ago, I know there was a lot of discussion about changing the configuration of fire trucks, which were, the fire trucks were driving the whole design of streets. Has there been any progress in that regard with regard to having smaller vehicles or?
I haven't heard anything like that. I know they are trying to move to a system where more calls are handled by sort of the medical response, and
Right.
so I think that's probably helping. But as far as the fire trucks, I think they're still using the same design. What we've done is we've been working really hard to develop traffic calming tools that work with them, and so we've had a bunch of tests of these fire-friendly speed bumps with cutouts in the middle that fire trucks can use, but drivers have a really hard time using. And so what they've said is that those have a pretty small effect on their response times, maybe a few seconds, whereas traditional speed bumps were having a very big effect. So at this point, they're very comfortable with their use, and even on major routes, we've been able to get them to agree to let us use those. And this will help us even more to have the secondary routes where we can just use them by policy.
Eli and then Chris.
I guess I have a similar follow-up question because I've seen the fire department, for example, require a whole street face to be red painted so they can get by and not have any on-street parking. Would that become a possible future for some of these secondary routes? In other words, does the fire department potentially, in lieu of getting narrower vehicles or other things they might consider, push that issue to other forms of the transportation systems, like removing street parking or blocking curb extensions or things like that, because now these routes would need to be protected for fire vehicle access?
That certainly hasn't come up. We've been pretty clear that the intention of the secondary routes was to be rarely used. Basically, they would only be used if the major route had, let's say a crash happened and it was completely blocked or there was major congestion. So we've been trying to make clear that the street wouldn't really be designed any differently. But that's a good concern, so we can follow up on it.
I guess the question would be is, what does this mean for that street? Why make the designation in the first place if it doesn't? I assume the request is because they're asking for some design constraints on that street. So I guess I'd really like to know what that is. Just a follow-up. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, the biggest change would be that we would not be able to use regular speed bumps. We would have to use these fire-friendly speed bumps, which are a little more expensive, and we have to design them correctly. But so that was intended to be the main difference. Yeah.
So I actually also have a question for Francesca. You guys transitioned so fast, I didn't get a chance to get in. But I have a request on the maps, which is really the same request I made when we did the Central City Plan. The way they're presented in the document, they're broken up into 8.5 by 11 pages that cover, a few blocks of the city, and you have to, pan your way through these to understand the system. I find it impossible to review a system that way. So the request is for a digital document that's pannable, zoomable, that should show, both the area immediately inside of the central city boundary, not just a gray blob, so you can tell how the system connects into the central city, and conversely at the city limits, how you can see how it connects to the next jurisdiction, so you can really evaluate whether the system works. So if you could find a way to publish that for us to use, for citizens to use, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely, Chris. That's a really good point. And another thing that we've heard is for folks reviewing these geographic policies in particular, they really want to be able to see where their neighborhoods are and where their neighborhood fell before and where it falls now. So we want to make all of that available for folks. And the only way to do that is to allow them to pan in and just zoom in, because that paper version just doesn't work out. But we do have our map expert here, and I'm sure we can ask her more too.
And all of these classifications will be going on the map app. So we'll be using,
great.
Yeah, we'll be using that tool again. And we've been trying to figure out a way to kind of show the central city while still acknowledging that that's going through a separate process. That's always the challenge. But, so perhaps we can show where they're at right now, but not have people comment on them, because it might be confusing for people, but yeah.
Okay, that's very good news, thank you. And then that's a perfect segue to my next question for Francesca. So I'm looking at the boundary between the inner neighborhoods and the eastern neighborhoods, and it bulges out at Lentz, which makes all the sense in the world. What doesn't make sense to me is that it doesn't bulge out in the same way at Gateway. It's, Gateway is the only regional center in the city of Portland. I would think that our policies, would imply for greater intensity in Gateway than they would in the rest of the eastern neighborhoods. So I don't know why the inner neighborhoods don't bulge out at Gateway.
So Eric is here too, but currently we're following what was adopted in the comp plan.
I was afraid you were going to tell me.
Yeah, so that's still being reviewed at the state level, but that doesn't mean you can't comment on it and let us know that that's something you think should move forward. But I think under the current process, we'd have to wait to do that. But valid point.
Mm-hmm.
But currently we're just using we're using what was recently adopted by council.
Questions? No, I had just maybe a comment on freight. It seemed repeatedly, especially in the quadrant plan discussions, to hear pushback, comments, desires to understand or have a better, more enhanced freight system. Yet I'm hearing we're still continuing to kind of push it out, studying and understanding what we can do there. So I guess just more of a word of encouragement to up the timeline on that and put some priority to getting that work accomplished.
So now we'll have Peter and Steve come up. And we have about 10 minutes total left in our time together, so.
I could make it really, really short and just say we have a new autonomous vehicles policy we're recommending and changes to the performance measures, but I suspect that you probably want a little bit more than that. If we could. Okay, so I'll cover two sections. One of them is the connected and autonomous vehicles policy, which would be a new section in the transportation system plan, and then updates to the performance measures section. So autonomous vehicles have real opportunities. There are certainly opportunities for the use of autonomous vehicles to improve safety, for example, by being able to sense when people and animals are crossing the road, for example, and to respond quickly. Vehicles, if they are tested and programmed correctly, do not drive impaired. So there are potential safety benefits among other potential benefits. There are also potential threats to the goals that were adopted in the comprehensive plan and the transportation system plan previously, not the least of which is for what we're calling empty miles, trips that have zero occupant or very low occupancy in those trips, and potentially a lot more of them. So the key element of the policy that we're proposing is the second bullet there, to ensure that autonomous vehicles advance Portland's multiple transportation goals. What we are saying by that is that the policy is about how the technology will serve our goals, not about how our streets will serve the technology. That is a very fundamental difference than that Portland is making from some of the other jurisdictions that have had issues with autonomous vehicles thus far, Pittsburgh being an example of that. So that being the foundation of the policy, there are other pieces that support that. For example, how do we do it? One of the things we're recommending or suggesting in the policy is that we prioritize fleet autonomous vehicles that are electric and shared. It's a handy little acronym, FAVES. Fleet vehicles are those which are owned by organizations and therefore can lower automobile ownership, lower the need for parking in neighborhoods, lower some of the parking conflicts. Electric vehicles obviously have the potential, if the energy source is clean, to reduce climate pollution, to reduce other air pollutants as well that we have issues with in the city of Portland. And shared vehicles carry multiple individuals, and we definitely want to prioritize vehicles that carry multiple passengers so that we're using the system more efficiently. So that's one of the ways that we get at advancing those multiple transportation goals. Very quickly, the objectives A through F within the new policy articulate the individual goals such as safety, such as reducing climate pollution, such as improving equitable access to opportunity. Objectives G through O focus on what are some of the tools that we might use. And there is very explicitly a call out for looking at how do we price the use of the system. So we have very scarce right of way and very high demand for that right of way during certain hours. Most goods in this country we price based on supply and demand. We're suggesting that we take a look at how do we price the use of that right of way with this new technology. And the other substantive change that I want to note in the autonomous vehicles policy. Okay. Lovely graphic on the left. Many of you may be familiar with the people moving strategy that prioritizes walking, bicycling, and transit. Those will not change. What should be on the left are three other components that include taxis and other shared vehicles, zero emission vehicles, and other single occupant vehicles. We're suggesting a change to recognize that fleet autonomous vehicles that are electric and shared are a higher priority. So for pickup and drop-off zones, for example, we may want to prioritize access from a vehicle that's carrying 6 people rather than 1 person, for example. We may also want to prioritize vehicles that are fully autonomous and therefore more likely to stop if a pedestrian enters the roadway. We also want to indicate that the zero occupant vehicles, the very low occupancy vehicles, are not as high a priority as other vehicles or walking, bicycling, and transit. So I'd like to give you a little bit of an overview of the broader context for autonomous vehicles. What's in front of you is the policy. That'll be in front of you on September 26th. I suspect many of you may have heard about the mayor and Commissioner Saltzman announcing a smart autonomous vehicles initiative back on April 19th. There are 4 elements of that initiative, the first of which is the policy that you'll be considering. There's also a request for information that we published on June 9th. So on Friday, we published a request for information that essentially invites technology companies to propose to us what are some of the ways that you could use a vehicle or other technologies, data technologies, communication technologies, to advance our goals, to advance safety, to advance the multiple occupancy of vehicles, to help with that first and last mile. So rather than be passive and wait for companies to come in and say, we'd like to use your right of way for these purposes, we're saying this is the way we would like you to suggest using your technology to advance these goals. We're also going to be posting a draft administrative rule that would say if you do want to operate an autonomous vehicle on the streets within the right-of-way of the city of Portland, we welcome your application. We'll review it for safety and other factors and give you a permit if it meets the criteria. So we do want to have a review of the potential uses of the right-of-way. That's what the administrative rule would do. We'll be publishing a draft for comment. And we also have a public engagement plan. This is obviously a subject which many people have a lot of questions about, and we want to make certain that we hear from a broad range of stakeholders. So I'd like to, and unless there are any questions, I'd like to turn to the system performance measures. So system.
No, I was just going to say, why don't we just go ahead anyway, and we'll take questions at the end.
Very good. System performance measures, as the term implies, they're not about sites, they're not about corridors per se, but they're about how the system as a whole functions. You recommended and City Council adopted a series of performance measures as part of the Phase 2, Stage 2 of the Transportation System Plan. We're suggesting a few updates. The 3 most notable of those are we're recommending that Vision Zero be moved to the first objective. Another is that we're suggesting a new congestion measure. We currently don't have anything other than the interim regional mobility policy, which is an old policy that's been slated to it's been interim for a very long period of time, and it's time to replace it. And then the third is commute mode share. And I'll go into detail on the second and the third. First one's fairly self-evident, that we're simply moving Vision Zero to the top of the list. So we're suggesting a new measure, in part for compliance with the Regional Transportation Functional Plan, to maintain or decrease the number of peak period single occupant vehicle trips. So a congestion measure that's not based explicitly on level of service. This is really based on how do we ensure that we're not increasing the number of single occupant vehicle trips. And I will explain the diagram there. So the first thing to focus on is that higher number. If we were to simply maintain the mode share that we had in 2010 and had the growth in trips that are projected as a result of the increase in both housing and jobs within the city of Portland and the region as a whole, we'd have about 2 million trips a day. That's more than 500,000 additional trips from what we had in 2010. The system would be, it's bad for congestion and it's bad for climate pollution, among other things. So as a result of a series of comprehensive plan, land use changes, and transportation system plan changes, the projects and programs in the TSP, we can reduce many of those, but not all of those additional trips. There still is a trip gap of about 63,000 trips per day on average. So part of what this congestion performance measure, some of the other actions that we're proposing to take is to start whittling down those remaining trips, which are going to be more difficult to reduce, and to try to differentiate between commute trips and all-day trips. So just to recognize that that's there, it's something that we're working on. It's the piece that would allow the system to, for congestion to be better managed in specific corridors during specific periods of time. So commute mode share changes. We're suggesting several changes. One thing that we are not changing, which is actually quite important, is that we're recommending that we maintain the 70% mode share target for commute trips. And this is for commute trips. I want to differentiate this from all trips. Commute trips are about 12% of total trips. The other 88% are trips to school, to the grocery store, to healthcare, et cetera. So for commute mode share only, we're recommending maintaining a 70% non-SOV mode share target. We're responding to a directive from you, the Planning and Sustainability Commission, to recommend a work-at-home target. We're recommending a 10% work-at-home target. We are recommending resetting the bike commute mode share target to 15%. And we are recommending slightly increasing the shared vehicle or carpool target to 12.5%. To give you an idea of what that actually, what those major changes are, the drive alone rate in 2015, according to the American Community Survey, was 58%. The target that we're recommending of 30% is almost half of the 2015 number. To get there, we're recommending more than doubling the bike mode share from 7% to 15%, and the transit mode share from 13% to 25%, just a little less than doubling. Now, this is a difference from the current bike commute mode share target of 25%. So we are proposing to reset that. One of the reasons that we're proposing to do so, we did 3 analyses, and I'll walk you through each of them. One of the analyses was to look at how far people generally travel in active modes. So the orange line in this slide is the percentage of active transportation trips that are 1 mile, 2 miles, all the way up to 10 miles. The blue are the distance between home and work. And the bottom line, the story, the narrative, when we looked at the mismatch or found that there is a mismatch between travel distance to work and travel by active modes, is that even in 2035, there are too few jobs too far from housing to get as far as we would ideally like to go. We didn't just want to look at this, though. We wanted to look at it from a few different angles because this is actually pretty important. So we looked at not only the home-based work trip distance, but we also looked at the numbers that were coming out of the regional travel demand model that showed, unfortunately, pretty low bike mode shares in 2035. Now, a caution is that the regional travel demand model is not primarily for modeling mode share. It's really a distribution model for a variety of trips. Over the last 25 years of American Community Survey data, and it does show that if we are pretty aggressive over the next 20 years, that there is a chance that we could hit that 15% bike mode share target. So we're recommending that between now and September 26th, when we come back to you, that we take a look at what kind of data, what kind of modeling or projections would we need in order to come up with an all trips mode share target, which is, as I said, 8 times as many trips as the commute mode share target. There are some real challenges, some real data and modeling challenges, but we think that that would be quite valuable to be able to come back to you and with some strategies that we think might be viable for achieving those targets. So that's it for my portion of the presentation.
Introduce Steve. So Steve Sigathy is here from our project management group. He's been working in the South Waterfront District on making some updates to not only the master street plan itself, but also some criteria and design standards. And he may be able to piggyback onto the TSP3 process. And so we wanted to make sure that you got a briefing about what he's working on. And then we're still working with staff and the city attorney to make sure we know exactly what we're amending. But we wanted to make sure that you heard about that in case, and hopefully you do see it in September. So this is Steve Sigathy.
Thanks, Courtney, and good afternoon, commissioners. Hopefully I'll get you through your, I think it's the last substantive topic of the afternoon.
If we can keep them brief, otherwise I'd say let's just get through it. So I guess, how many people have questions for Peter? 2? Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so work from home. We agreed it was a valuable goal. There's been some discussion in the community about whether that should be tracked as a trip reduction goal or a modal percentage of trips. Are we shrinking the pie or are we dividing the pie in a different way? Do you have thoughts on why you chose the approach you did?
If you look at the full range of performance measures together, we're attempting to accomplish multiple goals. And those include giving people healthy access to opportunity. One way of doing so while also reducing climate pollution and reducing congestion is to encourage more opportunity to work at home. And because the work at home target contributes to achieving other multiple performance targets, we felt like it was worth adding to the mix of modal strategies. Just like, for example, increasing the walking percentage or increasing the transit percentage or increasing the bike percentage of trips increases both opportunity while reducing climate pollution and reducing congestion. So we felt like it fit into that suite of modal shares.
You don't have any concern that it then makes the other modal shares go down because you sliced the pie differently?
I think and we have had some internal discussions on the math associated with that. Because we are more focused on outcomes, are we actually reducing climate pollution, reducing congestion, giving people more equitable access to opportunity, and that work at home is a strategy that helps contribute to that? We felt that it fit the suite. Not that there weren't any drawbacks to doing so, but that was a preponderance of the evidence weighed toward putting it in that suite.
All right. Bike commute share. Also been a lot of discussion in the community that we're backsliding. So I think the 25% goal has been in the climate action plan for some time. How confident are you in the modeling that says we just can't get there?
So I'm not as confident in the regional travel demand model results, in part because it's not designed as a mode share model. It's designed as more as a distribution model. And that's the reason that we decided to conduct these other analyses. I am more persuaded by the trip distance, particularly as we look out at 2035 and look at the distance between home and work. I think we can certainly make some progress through some of the investments in the longer bicycle network connectivity that's part of the transportation system plan. And so I think we can actually move the numbers fairly significantly. The other component, when we looked at all the relatively small bicycle projects and how much they would contribute, the ones that don't take a lane or don't take any parking, those make major changes in improving bike access, but not necessarily the much longer trips. So what I do have confidence in is that with an aggressive investment strategy and the type of prioritization that we see in the people moving hierarchy, that the doubling bicycle mode share over the next 20 years is within the realm of possibility. Quadrupling it seems, unless we had some policies that are currently not on the table, probably not within the realm of possibility.
So one of the factors you looked at was elasticity. And you've just talked about elasticity with respect to facility improvements. What about elasticity in response to automobile congestion? If you crossed the Hawthorne Bridge recently, cycling looks pretty damn good. You know, if literally people are sitting in their cars in traffic, which is starting to happen in Portland because we're not collapsing that curve fast enough, isn't that in itself an inducement that's likely to boost the bicycle commute share?
It is, and when we looked at just the last several years' numbers from the American Community Survey since the end of the recession and the significant increase in jobs that we've experienced in Portland, we are seeing growth resuming in bicycle mode share and transit as well, actually. So if we look at that, it makes the 15% number, I think, more realistic. Still does not put us on track to achieve a 25% number.
Okay, we're going to get to continue this debate when we get to the proposed draft. One point you didn't mention in performance measures is using LOS, level of service, as a performance measure for development review. I know PBOT had an internal effort to find an alternative a while back that I think didn't go anywhere. I was really hoping by the time we got here we'd have a better indicator than that. Any chance of getting something by the proposed draft that's an improvement on that?
So you may be familiar with the fact that we are moving to a person trip methodology for the system development charges, moving away from just an automobile trip generation. That essentially lays a data foundation. We'll be collecting data for all trips, not just automobile trips. There is some discussion, in fact, we're having a discussion next week internally on how do we take that new methodology that's going to be used for system development charges and perhaps use that as a way of looking at both corridor performance corridor performance and site impact and mitigation. Where that will lead, I think it's a little too early to tell at this point in time, but there's still a strong desire within the Bureau to have a site development set of performance measures which are reflective of the goals that we've adopted in the comp plan and the TSP.
Thank you.
So just a couple of questions. So when we talk about the 10% work at home goal, one thing that triggers for me is we've had things like WeWork becoming more and more popular because people want the social element, even if they don't have to physically go downtown to a job. So is there some way to sort of capture people that perhaps aren't driving into the city for a job, but don't want to work at home? I mean, I just wonder how we capture that social desire.
I think at least I have a partial answer, but I think I want to think a little bit more about it. The partial answer is that those often result in shorter trips, and the shorter trips both contribute to our vehicle miles traveled goal, which you recommended and council adopted as part of stage 2 of the TSP. So we are making a contribution with the shorter trips. The other aspect of that is that, as you saw from the chart, when trips are shorter, 3 miles or less, they're much more likely to be walk and bike trips. So I think in both of those ways, if people are making those trips to locations that are closer to where they live, we can contribute to several of our goals. They're probably also likely to be, at least in some cases, on corridors that are less congested. But I'll give it some additional thought, because I think that is it's not just work at home or work downtown or another major employment center.
And it's not every day. If you work at home one day a week, that would go a long way towards your
Yes.
I'll tell my boss.
20%.
And then the other one was just, is the expectation that the state's going to issue some sort of AV driver's license to driverless vehicles that you're going to have to coordinate with?
So we are talking regularly. In fact, we have a weekly call with some of our colleagues at the Oregon Department of Transportation. There was a bill in the legislature that failed that would have provided a preemption on cities. It would have preempted the ability of cities and counties to establish or to use our authority to manage how autonomous vehicles are used. So we want to work with both Metro and ODOT to be able to come up with a comprehensive, cohesive approach that respects the authority, the home rule authority that we have to manage our streets.
So Catherine and Julie, I wanted to check with the two of you. It's 4 o'clock. I think we probably have 5 to 10 minutes left, depending upon questions. So I just wanted to respect everyone's time and see what both of you wanted to do.
Appreciate it. You beat me to the question. So I guess I'm kind of looking to my fellow commissioners on your ability to stay another 15 minutes. Okay. I think we've got enough people here that can stay. So why don't we power through it?
Okay.
You're saying 5? So, fair enough. And then I guess just respecting everybody's time here, I guess, for follow-up questions, perhaps it's just let's leave them with follow-up questions and not worry about answering the questions. And that might help us kind of wrap it up. Thank you, Steve.
Yes, thank you. And this, we will have a more substantive version of this presentation along with TSP3 in September. So we have some major development and infrastructure proposals going on in South Waterfront, and to be successful, those would be supported by some modest changes to the South Waterfront Street Plan, which is a document that we've had for almost 20 years that establishes the location and size and other characteristics of the public rights-of-way in South Waterfront. Doing this does implicate the master street plan component of the TSP, and that's why we're before you today. Typically, when we do an update to the street plan, the modification request goes to the city engineer. If we're modifying street standards and materials, which we have some modest changes there, we go to Design Commission, and we did on June 1st. You all get involved when we're looking at changes in street classifications and functions, as well as the connectivity of the street grid. And then with those advisements from PSC and Design Commission, we go to City Council to adopt those by resolution. Thanks, Peter. The focus of what we have today is our focusing on the Zidell property between Telecom Crossing and Portland Aerial Tram, as well as what we call the South Portal area, which is generally south of Lowell Street. Zidell Marine is going to be launching their final barge on Friday. And after that, and currently they are in the redevelopment mode for their South Waterfront properties. And they have developed a new master plan over the past year or so in concert with city staff and Prosper Portland, previously PDC. Here you see some images from that master plan. Looking at about 4 million square feet of new mixed-use development, retail, residential, housing, including affordable housing, and also including an adaptive reuse of the barge building. The main changes to the street plan associated with this are changes to the alignment and location of River Parkway and Woods Street, as well as a minor network of private circulation features, which could be shared streets. Private streets are not regulated in the street plan, but we propose showing them for reference to show the broader connectivity of the street grid and the pedestrian network. In the South Portal area, we've been working for several years on solutions to the circulation and congestion challenges in this area. And in December of 2016, Council adopted some of those changes. One change that was not adopted and was sort of punted until later was we determined that we can remove the Bond and Hamilton extensions, at least from the arterial grid, and solve some of those issues. And in doing so, also saving approximately $50 million in a public or public-private project here. However, we did not want to remove those streets entirely because of our block size and connectivity requirements in the street plan and in other city and regional policies. So what we are proposing to do is to remove the Bond and Hamilton extensions as streets, but to have 3 pedestrian bicycle access ways that still create that finer scale block structure that we would expect to see in the central city. And one other important aspect here is that even with these ped bike connections, there may still be some full street connections required upon redevelopment. So this does not preclude Bond or any of these streets having vehicle circulation. At the very least, we want them to have pedestrian and bicycle circulation. And so here you're just seeing the resulting proposed amended map with some of the major changes shown here. River Parkway sliding over this way, Woods Street here. You're seeing the 3 bicycle and pedestrian access ways in South Portal. There are several other minor changes to alignments and features in the street plan that we could get into more detail in September when we hope to have a more substantive presentation and potential proposed recommendation to council. So that would be the next step. We're going to spend the summer refining some of these features. They are, we think, pretty close. Visiting you again on the 26th, and hopefully a recommendation to council for some time in most likely November. So that's all I have on the street plan, which affects the master street plan component of the TSP. Any questions?
Any questions, comments? Eli?
My question's going back to the former presentation. I wasn't sure how it synced up. So 2 quick items that could be followed afterwards. First, on the home-based business discussion, I mentioned a little over a year ago, I think, and I'll mention again that I would suggest that BPS consider doing a zoning code update to the home-based business chapter, which I think could be eased. Right now, it's pretty restrictive. And there's a type A, type B business, and it's very easy to trick into the type B classification. So I would just sort of ask if there's any opportunity to update that section of the code to support home-based businesses. And the other question I have, which maybe for follow-up, is in the prioritization of uses like walking, biking, transit. There's a couple tables on page 20 and page 170. I think you referred to the updated version of it.
Mm-hmm.
But on one of the tables, there's a, in the footnote, it talks about freight as prioritized over single occupancy vehicles. And it sort of raised the question for me of if freight, I like the idea of labeling the tables like for moving people, but if freight really is part of that hierarchy, why don't we just put it in the hierarchy and be explicit about it? Maybe there's a reason not to do that, but in reading it, it feels like you have to get to the footnote to realize that freight is actually part of that prioritization. And if that's the case, it really matters what's moving on the road and what we're designing the road for. Whether it's moving people or hot dogs, it doesn't matter that much what, So just as a possible reframing, it might be fair to put freight in the list and just see where it falls. Thanks.
We will do a follow-up with you on that.
Okay, we're almost done.
And I'd like to be a part of that follow-up.
Okay.
I do just want to maybe have a follow-up with Steve on, you talked about Sidell area and South Portal, but I as somebody who's been working in the, let's say, more central district, there seems to be some cleanup that needs to happen in the streetscape plan, and don't know if you guys are, those are some of the other things you're looking at and we just didn't go into, and if not, we should talk.
Yeah, thank you. And in fact, this is a great opportunity. We are using this opportunity to do minor cleanup, so definitely open to suggestions there.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll either put something together or we'll email or something like that, have a conversation.
Sounds great, thank you.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we're on our way to being almost done. So Erin Agner is here. She's our digital document expert, and so she's just going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do to make the document easier to read and use. And I think some of the questions that Chris had are feeding into this. So she'll give a quick update on that, and then I'll do a little bit about public involvement and next steps, and then we're done.
Before I show you the preview of this site that's under development, I do want to let everybody know that the three classifications that are up for, that are in this discussion draft are all been posted on the map app, so they are available for review right now. And it actually says that in this print document as well, so you don't have to rely just on the print maps in here. So what you're looking at now is a live demo of a site that's under development. So we'll hope for the best here. But basically what you're looking at is under development site of what the final TSP will look like. So on one side over here, you have a browsable and searchable chapter by chapter way of going through the text. There will be an index over here that will allow you to search for anything you want. So we could search for, I don't know, very basic, oh, because I spelled it wrong, live demos. Obviously, many references to street. And then you could click through them, master street plans. Take me there, please. No. You can go through it this way, or you can go back to, maybe we should search for something else. Oops. It's supposed to take us to the place. Excuse that. The other way you can navigate the information of the TSP, and a lot of the interest will be in using the map. And so over here, we'll be able to select from the projects, and then you'll also be able to see the street classifications. So I can click on a specific project and it will pop up. Can zoom in, obviously pan, and then we can also look at the street classifications at the same time. And those will be also clickable, so you could find out the segment of Stark Street is current, what, right now this is showing what it currently is and what the proposed classification is, but upon publication, it would just tell you what the street classification is. Also, this will be searchable by address, so we can type in any address in the city. It would take you directly there. You could find out then the classifications of the street in front of the property you're interested in, and or any of the projects near it. So some of the similar functions that we're all accustomed to from the map app and other. You can also hide the map if you're just interested in searching the text, or you can just hide the text and focus completely on the map. So like I said, this is under development, and looking forward to hearing people's feedback about functions they like and functions that they would like to included.
Does it have transit stops?
So we do have, that's a great idea. We're going to have this reference down here at the bottom, and so we can put different layers on there. So yeah. Have those
Just because the zoning code make reference to it, to have the two tied together would be certainly helpful.
Great
looks
idea.
like Eli.
Well, yeah, for me, my front end for most city online stuff is Portland Maps.
Yep.
something be added to Portland maps, which would pop you from an address right to this place on this map? Same for
Certainly.
the comp plan map, actually, as I think of it, because right
Certainly.
now, I don't know how to do it if it's possible.
Right.
Thanks.
Great idea.
Okay, so, and Aaron can come back and we'll talk about that in a minute too. Okay, because we're almost done. You're so close. Oh, no, you need to get back out. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start talking about the next stuff while she's getting us out. So we just wanted to talk quickly about some of the public involvement and outreach that we're doing. Francesca, who was here earlier, who may still be here, I'm not sure yet, has been working on our outreach plan. So these are the events we've had so far. So I'm not going to read them all out, but here's what we've done, including you here today. We've got an information sheet, which we have a copy here. If you'd like to take one, we can pass out. Aaron and Francesca put together a story map, which is a nice interactive version of all that. We have web updates, and then we have requests on the website for staff to present, which I'm doing later tonight. So the next steps, between now and July 21st, when the comments are due, we have public involvement. These are the ones that we have scheduled so far. Again, we're getting requests from folks, but we also are sending out, or Francesca is sending out interested party email reminders. We're doing additional presentations, and we have a social media presence. At this point, we're not coming back to see you until September, but as we mentioned at the officers briefing, we can come back again, maybe late July, early August for another briefing. The digital document will be further along. We'll have had some feedback from the public at that point. We may have had some discussions with all of you. So we'll talk with staff and with you if that would be something of interest to have. But at this point, we're scheduled for the end of September, and we're feeling really confident that it can be a work session and a decision and a hearing. But if not, that's okay too. So then we're looking at November and December at City Council. So at this point, we're not scheduled with you again, but again, we might want to do something in the summer for that. And then I just wanted to acknowledge the TSP team. A lot of our staff was here today, especially some of our interns who've been working on this. So the team has been here, and Aaron's been working with a consultant, and we've been working with Eric at BPS. So that's what we've got right now. So we have handouts. We can get you hard copies of the document. Everything is live, and then we can speak with leadership if you'd like us to come again.
Okay, fabulous. Any other
Sure,
questions,
yeah.
follow-up? Thank you for going through everything.
You're welcome. Thank
Just
you.
my kind of gut reaction to the question of coming back might be that we prompt the group for, after they've had some time to digest, questions, order, and then
Perfect.
questions and all that, and we'll just see if it kind of makes some sense.
Perfect. Sounds
And
good.
it might get you closer to having all that work session recommendation.
Right, and again, we
Okay.
can always come to the officers' briefings, even if we're not coming to hear, or meet with people individually as well. So
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody, for staying late. We are adjourned.